The day Wyatt Calder buried his father, he learned the old man had been keeping secrets, dangerous ones that reached across property lines and into the heart of the woman he'd abandoned 6 years ago. Standing in the attorney's office, dust motes dancing in afternoon light, Wyatt heard a name he'd sworn to forget. Lily Warren, the widow, his first love. Living just over the ridge on land his father had helped her buy. Some ghosts, it seemed, refused to stay buried. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The wind cut through Riverbend Ridge like a promise that couldn't be kept. Wyatt Calder stood at the fence line of his father's ranch, one boot propped on the lowest rail, his hat pulled low against the October cold. The land stretched before him in rolling waves of brown grass and scattered pine, familiar as his own heartbeat, but foreign as a stranger's face. 6 years. 6 long years since he'd seen this view, and now he owned every acre of it, along with every debt, every broken fence post, every memory he'd tried to outrun. His father's funeral had been 3 days ago. The whole town had turned out, filling the small Methodist church until people stood along the walls. Benjamin Calder had been a hard man, respected if not loved, and the ranchers of Montana knew how to honor their own. Wyatt had stood beside the coffin in a suit that didn't fit right anymore, shaking hands with neighbors who remembered him as a boy, accepting condolences that felt hollow as winter wind. Now the mourners were gone, the casseroles eaten or stored away, and Wyatt was alone with the enormity of what his father had left him. Not just land, though there were 3,000 acres of it, but questions. So many questions. The attorney's office in town smelled of old paper and lemon oil. Miles Granger had been the Calder family lawyer for 30 years, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the kind of patience that came from dealing with stubborn ranchers his entire career. He'd laid out the will with careful precision, explaining terms Wyatt already understood. The ranch was his, free and clear except for a small mortgage. The livestock, the equipment, the water rights, all of it transferred to the only surviving Calder son. There are some irregularities in the books, Miles had said, shuffling through a stack of ledgers. Your father made several large cash withdrawals over the past 3 years. No documentation on where the money went. Wyatt had frowned, studying the numbers. $20,000 drawn out in increments over 36 months. Not enough to bankrupt the ranch, but enough to notice. He didn't mention anything to you? Ben kept his own counsel. Miles removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. But there's something else you should know. The Warren property, the old Henderson place, just over the eastern ridge. Your father had a financial interest in that land. The name hit Wyatt like a fist to the gut. Warren. He'd kept his face carefully neutral, but his hands had tightened on the arms of the leather chair. What kind of interest? He held a private note. Helped finance the purchase 3 years ago when the property went up for auction. The new owner, a young widow named Lily Warren, she's been making payments regularly, right on schedule. Miles had looked up then, his sharp eyes studying Wyatt's face. I thought you should know, given the history between your families. History. Such a small word for such a complicated tangle of love and loss and bitterness that went back generations. Now standing at the fence line, Wyatt let himself think the name he'd been avoiding for 3 days. Lily. Lily Henderson, as he'd known her. Except she wasn't a Henderson anymore. She'd married someone named Warren, and now she was a widow, and she lived less than 2 miles from where he stood. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been standing in this exact spot. 22 years old, her dark hair whipping around her face in the summer wind, tears streaming down her cheeks. He'd been 24, holding his father's ultimatum like a knife to his own throat. Choose the ranch or choose the girl. The Hendersons were thieves and liars, his father had said. Their families had been feuding since before Wyatt was born, over water rights and boundary disputes and old grudges no one could fully explain. If Wyatt married Lily Henderson, he'd be cut off without a cent. He'd chosen the ranch. God help him. He'd chosen duty over love, and the look on Lily's face when he told her still haunted his dreams. She'd been wearing a blue dress, he remembered, the color of Montana sky in August. She hadn't said a word when he explained, just nodded once, turned, and walked away. He'd left for Wyoming the next morning, taking work on a ranch in Jackson Hole, and he hadn't come back. Not for holidays, not for his father's 70th birthday, not even when he heard Benjamin had taken sick. Pride was a poison, he'd learned. It killed slowly, but it killed sure. The sun was setting behind the western mountains now, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Wyatt turned back toward the house, a sprawling log structure his grandfather had built in 1952. It needed work, new shingles, fresh paint, repairs to the porch where boards had rotted through. His father had let things slide in his final years, too stubborn to ask for help, too proud to admit he couldn't manage alone. Inside, the house felt even emptier than outside. Wyatt had spent the past 3 days sorting through a lifetime of accumulated possessions, boxing up clothes for donation, deciding what to keep and what to let go. His mother's china, carefully wrapped and stored in the attic. His father's collection of ranch journals, leather-bound volumes dating back to 1955. Photographs in dusty frames, capturing moments from a life Wyatt had been only partially present for. He made coffee in the old percolator, the familiar sound oddly comforting in the silence. The kitchen hadn't changed since his childhood. Same yellow curtains his mother had sewn, same scarred wooden table where he'd done his homework, same view out the window toward the eastern ridge where the Henderson property began, where Lily lived now. Wyatt carried his coffee to his father's study, a small room off the main hall that smelled of leather and old tobacco. Benjamin's desk dominated the space, a massive oak piece covered in neat stacks of paper. Wyatt had been avoiding this room, dreading the task of sorting through years of ranch records and personal correspondence. But Miles had mentioned irregularities, and those missing $20,000 bothered him like a stone in his boot. He started with the desk drawers, methodically working through each one. Bills, receipts, feed store invoices, veterinary records, the mundane paperwork of ranch life. The bottom right drawer stuck when he tried to open it, and when he yanked harder, it came free with a crack of splintering wood. Inside, pushed to the very back, was a leather folder he didn't recognize. Wyatt pulled it out, weighing it in his hands. The leather was good quality, worn soft with handling, no label, no identifying marks. He opened it carefully, and a stack of letters slid onto the desk. They were all addressed to the same person, Lily Henderson. Warren, General Delivery, Riverbend Ridge, Montana. But none of them had been mailed. Each envelope was sealed, dated, and marked with his father's distinctive scrawl. Wyatt's hands shook as he picked up the first one, dated 3 years ago, right around the time Miles said the Warren property had been purchased. He hesitated for only a moment before sliding his finger under the flap and pulling out the single sheet of paper inside. Dear Lily, I hope this letter finds you in better circumstances than I suspect. News travels in small towns, and I heard about Robert's passing. I'm sorry for your loss. Whatever my feelings about your family, you didn't deserve that kind of grief so young. I also heard the bank is threatening foreclosure on the Henderson place, and that the Mitchells are circling like vultures, ready to buy it for pennies on the dollar. I can't let that happen. Your grandmother and my late wife were cousins, which makes us family whether we acknowledged it or not. Mary would never forgive me if I let you lose your heritage. I've arranged to loan you the money for the down payment. No interest, reasonable terms, payments you can manage on a widow's income. Miles Granger will handle the details. You don't need to thank me, and you don't need to tell Wyatt if he ever comes back. This is between us, settling old debts that should have been settled years ago. I drove your boy away from you, that's on my conscience, and I'll carry it to my grave. I can't undo what was done, but I can do this much. Benjamin Calder. Wyatt read the letter twice, then a third time, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His father, rigid, unforgiving Benjamin Calder, had given Lily money, had helped her keep her family land, had admitted, at least on paper, that he'd been wrong to force them apart. And there were more letters. He opened them in chronological order, watching his father's handwriting grow shakier as the months passed, the cancer that would eventually kill him taking its slow toll. Some letters were brief, just checking in about ranch business or asking how Lily's cattle were doing. Others were longer, more personal. In one, dated 18 months ago, Benjamin wrote about Wyatt's mother, Mary Calder, who died of influenza when Wyatt was 12. Mary's maiden name was Whitmore. Her mother was a Henderson, your grandfather's sister, which I suppose makes you and Wyatt some kind of third cousins. I never told him because it would have complicated the narrative I'd built about your family being outsiders, troublemakers. The truth is, the land disputes between our families started because Mary's father and yours couldn't agree on inheritance terms when old Samuel Henderson died. Pride and money, the two things that destroy families faster than anything else. I kept this from my son, and I kept him from you. I thought I was protecting the ranch, protecting the Calder legacy. But all I did was make sure my boy grew up alone and hard and drive away the one person who might have softened those edges. Wyatt set the letter down, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. His mother had been a Henderson. He and Lily were actually related by blood, however distantly. The feud that had torn them apart was built on nothing but pride and stubbornness and old men refusing to forgive. The last letter in the stack was dated 3 months before his father's death. The handwriting was barely legible, but Wyatt could make out the words, "Lily, I'm dying." "The doctors give me weeks, maybe a month if I'm stubborn enough. I thought I'd have more time, but cancer doesn't negotiate. I'm asking you to do something for me, though I have no right to ask anything. When Wyatt comes back, and he will come back, he's too much of a Calder not to. Will you talk to him? He's going to find out what I did, helping you with the ranch. Let him know it wasn't charity, it was restitution. Tell him his mother loved the Henderson place. She used to ride over there as a girl before her family lost it in the Depression. She'd take me there when we were courting, show me where she'd built forts in the creek bed, where she'd watched eagles nest in the tall pines. When you bought it back, I felt like I'd given her something, even though she's been gone 30 years. Tell Wyatt I was wrong. About everything. About your family, about keeping you two apart, about thinking love was less important than land. I was a stubborn old fool, and I died one. But at least let him know I figured it out in the end. If there's anything of me worth forgiving, I hope he can do that too." Benjamin Wyatt sat in the growing darkness, the letters spread across his father's desk like accusations. Outside, night had fallen completely, and the wind had picked up, rattling the window panes. He thought about his father, stern, demanding Benjamin, who'd never said, "I love you," but who'd taught Wyatt to ride before he could walk, who'd trusted him with ranch work by the time he was 10, who'd expected nothing less than perfection and settled for whatever Wyatt could give. Had the old man really changed? Or had he always been capable of this kind of compassion, buried so deep under years of accumulated bitterness that even he'd forgotten it was there? The coffee had gone cold in his cup. Wyatt stood, pacing to the window. The eastern ridge was invisible in the darkness, but he knew it was there, and he knew what lay beyond it. 2 miles. That's all that separated him from Lily. 2 miles and 6 years and a lifetime of choices that couldn't be undone. Miles had said she was making payments on schedule. That meant she was managing, running the place alone or with hired help. What had happened to her husband? How had he died? The letter mentioned Robert's passing 3 years ago, which meant she'd been widowed young. 25, maybe 26. God, she'd have been so young. Wyatt returned to the desk, carefully placing the letters back in their envelopes. His father had never mailed them, but that didn't mean they weren't meant to be read. Maybe Benjamin had left them here intentionally, knowing Wyatt would go through the desk, knowing his son would find them. One last lesson from beyond the grave. Some mistakes could be acknowledged, if not fully repaired. The clock on the mantel chimed 9. Too late to ride over tonight, even if he'd known what to say. Besides, Wyatt needed time to process this. The revelations about his mother's family, his father's change of heart, the knowledge that Lily was so close after all these years. He made himself a sandwich he didn't taste, took a shower in the bathroom with the perpetually dripping faucet, and lay in his childhood bed staring at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily as she'd been that last day, young and heartbroken, the wind in her hair, that blue dress rippling around her legs. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was a widow, a rancher, a woman who'd survived loss and grief, and apparently the whole damn town's prejudice against a young woman trying to run a cattle operation alone. She'd be different now, harder maybe, tempered by experience the way he'd been. Would she even want to see him? Or would his return just open old wounds she'd finally managed to close? The questions chased themselves through his mind until dawn crept through the windows. Wyatt gave up on sleep, dressed in the half-light, and went out to start morning chores. The barn needed mucking, the horses needed feeding, and the fence line along the north pasture had posts that were rotting through. Physical work, that's what he needed. Something to occupy his hands while his mind sorted through the tangle his father had left him. He was halfway through feeding when he heard the sound of hoofbeats on the drive. Wyatt straightened, pitchfork in hand, and watched as a rider came into view around the bend. The sun was just cresting the mountains, backlighting horse and rider in golden haze, and for a moment he couldn't make out details. Then they drew closer, and his heart stopped completely. She sat a horse like she'd been born on one, easy and confident, her body moving with the animal's rhythm. She wore work clothes, jeans, a canvas jacket, boots worn down at the heel, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid. She'd always been pretty, but time had refined that prettiness into something more striking. Her face had lost its girlish softness, the angles sharper now, more defined. But her eyes, God, her eyes were the same, that particular shade of gray-green that changed with the weather and her mood. She reined in 10 feet from where he stood, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. 6 years collapsed into seconds. Every word he'd rehearsed in the darkness fled his mind. Wyatt. Her voice was lower than he remembered, rough around the edges like she'd spent too many cold mornings calling cattle. Lily. His throat felt tight. I heard you were... I didn't expect... Miles told me you were back. She swung down from the saddle with easy grace, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. Said you'd probably want to talk about the loan arrangement. So this was business. She'd come about the money his father had lent her. Somehow that hurt more than if she'd come to yell at him for leaving. You didn't have to ride over. We could have met in town. Could have. She tied her horse to the fence rail, not looking at him. But I figured this conversation was better had in private, less chance of the whole town gossiping. Riverbend Ridge had maybe 500 people in it, counting the outlying ranches. Everyone knew everyone's business, usually before it happened. Wyatt nodded. Coffee? That'd be good. They walked to the house in silence, the morning air cold enough that their breath steamed. Wyatt was acutely aware of her beside him, the way she moved, the set of her shoulders, the fact that she kept several feet of careful distance between them. He held the door open and she paused for just a second before stepping inside. The kitchen felt too small with both of them in it. Wyatt busied himself with making fresh coffee, measuring grounds with hands that weren't entirely steady. Behind him, he heard Lily pull out a chair at the table, the same chair she'd always sat in when she'd visited in those brief, bright months before everything fell apart. House looks the same, she said quietly. Yeah. He poured water into the percolator. Dad wasn't much for change. I'm sorry about Ben. I know you two had your differences, but losing a parent is hard no matter what. Wyatt turned to face her. She was watching him with those changeable eyes, and there was genuine sympathy there, no trace of bitterness or anger. It should have made him feel better. Instead, it made him feel worse, because anger he could have handled. Understanding was harder. Thank you. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Miles said Dad helped you buy back the Henderson place. I found his letters, the ones he wrote but never sent. He explained some things. Her expression shifted, surprise flickering across her face. He kept those. I never knew he was writing them. You never got them. No. She shook her head. But we talked sometimes. He'd write over every few months, check on how things were going. Never stayed long, never made a big deal of it. Just... She paused, choosing her words. He seemed like he was trying to make something right. I appreciated it, even if I didn't fully understand it. The coffee started to percolate, filling the kitchen with its familiar scent. Wyatt grabbed 2 mugs from the cabinet, both chipped and old. The letters explained about my mother, that she was related to your family. I know. Ben told me that part in person, said he'd kept it from you and from your mother's family too after she died. Old grudges run deep in these mountains. Lily accepted the mug he handed her, wrapping her hands around it like she was warming herself. For what it's worth, I think he regretted it. Keeping you and me apart, I mean. Did you? The question came out before Wyatt could stop it. Regret it? Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something raw and honest there. Every single day for the first year. After that, just most days. The words hung between them, heavy with history. Wyatt pulled out the chair across from her, sitting down carefully. I should have fought him, should have told him to go to hell and stayed anyway. You were 24. He was your father, and this ranch was your inheritance. I understood, Wyatt. I didn't like it, but I understood. She took a sip of coffee, her eyes dropping to the table. Besides, I made my own choices after you left. Married Robert Warren, tried to build a different life. This was the opening he'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. What happened to him? Your husband. Logging accident. Her voice went flat, carefully neutral. 3 years ago, this December. He was working up near Glacier National Park, helping clear deadfall. Tree came down wrong, and he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Christ, Lily, I'm sorry. Me too. She looked up at him again. Robert was a good man. Not the love of my life, but good, kind. He treated me well, worked hard, and he didn't deserve to die at 28. Not the love of my life. The words echoed in Wyatt's head, and he hated himself for the small spark of hope they ignited. You've been running the place alone since then? I have help during busy seasons, hire on some local boys for branding and roundup, but mostly it's just me. There was pride in her voice now, a steel he didn't remember from before. I've got 40 head of cattle, a decent string of horses, and I just bought breeding stock from the Morrison Ranch. It's not a big operation, but it's mine, and I'm making it work. On widow's wages and town prejudice. Her smile was sharp. You've been talking to Miles. He mentioned the bank was giving you trouble. The bank gives every woman trouble if she's not married or isn't somebody's daughter. They think we're too emotional to handle money, too weak to manage livestock. The steel in her voice had turned to anger now, controlled but fierce. I've made every payment on time, kept my books clean as a whistle, and I still have to go in there every month and justify myself to Harold Peterson like I'm asking permission instead of conducting business. Wyatt felt his own anger rising in response. Harold Peterson had been a pompous ass when Wyatt left town, and apparently time hadn't improved him. You looking to expand? Miles mentioned something about a new loan. I want to buy the water rights on the north section, where Willow Creek runs through. Right now I'm leasing access from the Mitchell Ranch, and they jack up the price every year. If I can buy those rights, I'll have full control of my water supply. She set down her coffee cup with a decisive clink. But Peterson says I'm overextended, that I should consider selling to a more established operation instead of borrowing more money. By more established, he means the Mitchells. He means anyone with a dick and a last name that goes back 3 generations. The crude language surprised him, made him want to grin despite the serious conversation. Sorry, I've gotten rougher around the edges since you left. Don't apologize. I like it. The words came out more honest than he'd intended, and color rose in her cheeks. Wyatt cleared his throat, steering back to safer ground. What if you had a co-signer on the loan, someone with established credit? Her eyes narrowed. Don't. Don't what? Don't ride in like some kind of white knight trying to fix things. I've been handling this on my own for 3 years, Wyatt. I don't need rescuing. I'm not trying to rescue you. I'm trying to help a neighbor get a fair shake from a bank that's treating her like dirt. He leaned forward, holding her gaze. My father left me this ranch free and clear, except for a small mortgage. My credit's solid, and the Calder name still carries weight in this county, whether I like it or not. Let me do this much. She studied him for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes, pride versus practicality, independence versus pragmatism. Finally, she shook her head. I appreciate it, but no. If I'm going to make this work, I need to do it on my own terms. Even if that means losing the water rights? Even then. She stood carrying her half-finished coffee to the sink. I should get back. Got fence work waiting, and standing here arguing with you isn't going to mend posts. Wyatt stood too, blocking her path to the door without quite meaning to. They were close now, closer than they'd been since she arrived, and he could smell the scent of her, horse and hay and something floral that might have been soap. Lily, wait. What? But she didn't move away, and that had to mean something. Have dinner with me. Here, tomorrow night. Let me cook for you. God knows I learned something in 6 years away. And we can talk about something other than loans and land rights. Wyatt? Just dinner. 2 old friends catching up. Nothing more complicated than that. He was lying, and they both knew it, but she didn't call him on it. She looked up at him, and for just a second he saw the girl she'd been, uncertain, hopeful, wanting. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful control of a woman who'd learned not to trust easy promises. One dinner, but I'm not making any promises beyond that. Fair enough. She moved past him then, and he let her go, following her outside to where her horse waited. She mounted with the same easy grace, settling into the saddle like it was an extension of herself. The morning sun was fully up now, washing the valley in golden light, and she looked at him from that higher vantage point with something unreadable in her expression. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I'm glad you came back. This valley's been missing its Calder, even if nobody wanted to admit it. Then she turned her horse and rode away, and Wyatt stood in the yard watching until she disappeared over the eastern ridge. His heart was hammering, his hands shaking slightly, and he felt like he'd just survived something intense and vital. Tomorrow night. One dinner. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time since he'd gotten the telegram about his father's death, Wyatt Calder felt something other than grief and regret. He felt hope. Wyatt spent the rest of that day and most of the next preparing for dinner like a man possessed. He drove into town to the small grocery store, ignoring the curious stares from neighbors who hadn't seen him in 6 years. Mrs. Patterson behind the counter tried to engage him in conversation about his father's funeral, fishing for details about his plans for the ranch. But Wyatt kept his answers short and polite. He bought steaks, potatoes, fresh vegetables that had probably been trucked in from somewhere warmer, and a bottle of wine that the store's limited selection offered. Back at the ranch, he cleaned the house with an intensity that would have shocked his younger self. Swept floors, dusted surfaces, scrubbed the bathroom until it gleamed. He changed the sheets on his bed, then felt foolish for doing so. This was just dinner, nothing more. But he left them changed anyway, the fresh scent of detergent somehow making the whole house feel less like a tomb and more like a home. By 5 o'clock the following evening, he had the steaks seasoned, the potatoes roasting in the oven, and a salad assembled with more care than any salad in history probably deserved. He'd set the table with his mother's good dishes, the ones that lived in the china cabinet and only came out for special occasions. 2 place settings facing each other across the scarred wooden surface. Candles he'd found in a drawer and felt ridiculous for lighting, wine glasses that he'd had to wash twice to get the dust off. He changed his shirt 3 times before settling on a dark blue button-down that was clean and pressed but not trying too hard. Or at least he hoped it wasn't trying too hard. God, when had he turned into this person, nervous as a teenage boy on his first date? At 6:30, he heard hoofbeats again. His heart kicked into a higher gear as he went to the door, opening it to find Lily riding up the drive just as she had the morning before. But this time she'd made an effort too. He could see it in the clean jeans, the white blouse under her jacket, the way her hair hung loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in a practical braid. She dismounted, tied her horse, and climbed the porch steps with something that might have been nervousness in her eyes. I almost didn't come. What changed your mind? Wyatt held the door open, breathing in that scent of her again. Flowers and fresh air and something uniquely Lily. Curiosity. And the fact that I haven't had a meal I didn't cook myself in about 6 months. She stepped inside, looking around with open interest. You cleaned. Don't sound so surprised. I'm capable of basic housekeeping. The Wyatt I knew could barely make a bed. But she was smiling, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. Something smells good. Steak, if I haven't ruined it yet. Wine? He moved to the counter where he'd left the bottle open to breathe, something he'd learned from a ranch cook in Wyoming who'd fancied himself a gourmand. Please. She shrugged out of her jacket, hanging it on the peg by the door with the kind of casual familiarity that suggested muscle memory. How many times had she done that exact motion in this exact spot, back when they'd been young and stupid and convinced the world couldn't touch them? Wyatt poured 2 glasses, handed her one, and raised his own. To old friends. Old friends, she echoed, but her eyes said something more complicated as she clinked her glass against his. The wine was decent. Probably better than either of them was used to. They stood in the kitchen for a moment, the silence stretching just past comfortable, before Wyatt moved to check the potatoes. Dinner's almost ready. Make yourself at home. She wandered to the table, noticing the candles, the good dishes, and something shifted in her expression, softer, more vulnerable. You went to trouble. Some. Seemed like the least I could do after you rode all the way over here. He pulled the potatoes from the oven, trying to keep his tone light. Besides, I figured I owed you about 6 years' worth of dinners. Wyatt. Her voice carried a warning note. I know, just friends catching up, I remember. He plated the food with care, bringing both plates to the table. Sit, eat. Tell me what I've missed in Riverbend Ridge while I was busy pretending I could outrun my past. She sat, studying the meal he'd prepared, and for a moment he thought she might cry. But she didn't, just picked up her fork and knife and cut into the steak with steady hands. You learned to cook. Had to. Couldn't afford to eat out on ranch wages, and the bunkhouse food was barely edible. He sat across from her, watching as she took the first bite. Well? It's good. Really good. She looked up at him, surprised. When did you leave Wyoming? About 8 months ago. Moved to a ranch in Colorado. Bigger operation. Better pay. Worse winters. He ate his own food, tasting nothing, too focused on her presence across from him. Got the telegram about Dad in September. Took me 2 days to get here. Were you with him at the end? No, he died alone, according to Doc Morrison. Went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. The cancer had spread to his lungs, his liver. They'd given him weeks, and he made it 4 months on pure stubbornness. Wyatt set down his fork, the old grief mixing with newer regrets. I should have come back sooner. Maybe. Or maybe he didn't want you to see him like that, weak, failing. Ben was a proud man. Lily's voice was gentle, understanding in a way he didn't deserve. He talked about you sometimes when he'd ride over. Never directly, but I could tell. He'd mentioned something about the ranch needing work, say how it was too much for one old man, and I knew he was thinking about his son who'd stayed away. Did he ever say why he helped you, beyond what was in those letters? She was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. Once, about 6 months before he died, he rode over in the middle of a snowstorm, scared me half to death. I thought something was wrong, but he just wanted to sit by my fire and talk. We ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about your mother, how much he'd loved her, how losing her had turned him hard inside. Said he'd made mistakes with you, pushed too hard, demanded too much. And then he looked at me and said, I took away his chance at happiness because I was too damn stubborn to admit the Hendersons were family. Can't undo that. But I can make sure you don't lose everything too. Wyatt felt his throat tighten. He never said any of that to me. Men like your father don't know how to apologize with words. They do it with actions and hope you're smart enough to figure it out. She took another bite of steak, chewing slowly. I think he wanted you to find those letters. Wanted you to know he'd changed, even if he couldn't tell you himself. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the candles flickering between them, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Outside, full darkness had fallen, and the wind had picked up again, rattling the windows in their frames. It felt like they were the only two people in the world, isolated in this small circle of light and warmth. Tell me about Robert, Wyatt said finally, the question he'd been avoiding. You said he was a good man. Lily set down her wine glass, her fingers tracing the stem. He was. Quiet, steady, hard-working. He came to Riverbend Ridge about 7 years ago, looking for logging work in the mountains. We met at a church social, the kind of forced community gathering where everyone's trying to marry off their single people. A small smile played at her lips. He asked me to dance, and I said yes because it seemed easier than explaining why I didn't want to. But you married him. I did. About 6 months after you left for Wyoming. She looked up at Wyatt, her eyes steady. I was heartbroken and angry and tired of being the poor Henderson girl everyone pitied. Robert offered stability, a future. He didn't love me desperately, and I didn't love him that way either, but we cared for each other, built something comfortable. Comfortable, Wyatt repeated, the word tasting bitter. Don't judge what you don't understand. Comfortable isn't nothing, Wyatt. Comfortable is worth something when you're 23 and everyone in town is whispering about how you couldn't keep a man. Her voice sharpened, old hurt bleeding through. Robert gave me respect. He worked hard, came home every night, treated me like a partner. That's more than a lot of women get. You're right. I'm sorry. And he was. Sorry for the judgment, sorry for the circumstances that had driven her into someone else's arms, sorry for all of it. Did you love him at all? By the end? Yes, in my way. Not the all-consuming thing I felt for you, but something gentler, steadier. She paused, choosing her words carefully. When he died, I grieved. For him, for the future we'd planned, for the children we'd talked about having. But I also grieved for myself for being 25 and a widow and facing the whole damn world alone. Wyatt reached across the table before he could stop himself, covering her hand with his. Her skin was warm, calloused from ranch work, and she didn't pull away. You're not alone now. Aren't I? But her fingers curled slightly against his palm, betraying her words. You've been back less than a week, Wyatt. You'll settle your father's estate, decide the ranch is too much work or too many memories, and you'll leave again. That's what you do. The accusation stung because it was fair. I left once. Doesn't mean I will again. Why should I believe that? Because I'm telling you. He tightened his grip on her hand, willing her to hear the truth in his voice. I spent 6 years trying to forget this place, trying to forget you. Worked myself half to death on other people's ranches, moved every time I started to feel settled, kept running because I thought that's what freedom looked like. But it wasn't freedom. It was cowardice. And I'm done running. Lily's eyes searched his face, looking for cracks in his certainty. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm staying. I'm saying this ranch needs work and I'm going to do it. I'm saying... He took a breath, steadying himself. I'm saying I never stopped loving you, and coming back here made me realize I never will. She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly enough that her chair scraped across the floor. Don't do this. Why not? It's the truth. Because the truth doesn't change anything. She moved to the window, her back to him, shoulders rigid. You loved me 6 years ago too, and you still left. Love isn't enough, Wyatt. It never was. He stood, moving to her but not touching, giving her space. You're right. Love wasn't enough then because I was too young and too stupid to fight for it. But I'm not that kid anymore. And neither are you. We've both lived, both lost things, both learned what matters. And what matters? She turned to face him, tears shining in her eyes but not falling. This, us, the fact that 6 years and a marriage and a death and a whole lifetime of trying to move on couldn't kill what we had. He risked reaching for her then, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. I know I hurt you. I know I don't deserve another chance. But I'm asking for one anyway, because the alternative is spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I'm scared, she whispered, and the admission seemed to cost her. Me too. Terrified, if I'm being honest. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb grazing her cheek. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for just a moment. Then she stepped back, breaking the contact, wrapping her arms around herself. I need time. I need to think. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He meant it as reassurance, but she flinched anyway. People always say that, right before they leave. She moved past him, grabbing her jacket from the peg. Thank you for dinner. It was good to see you, Wyatt, but I should go. Lily, wait. Good night. She was out the door before he could stop her, moving quickly to her horse, mounting in one fluid motion. He followed her onto the porch, watching as she turned her horse toward home. I'll prove it to you, he called after her. However long it takes, I'll prove I'm staying. She paused, looking back at him over her shoulder. In the darkness, he couldn't read her expression, but her voice carried clear and sad on the wind. I hope you mean that. But hope's a dangerous thing when you've had it broken before. Then she was gone, riding into the night, and Wyatt stood on the porch in the cold until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. The dinner he'd prepared with such care sat half-eaten on the table. The candles had burned down to stubs, and he felt simultaneously more alive and more wrecked than he had in years. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hard work and harder thinking. Wyatt threw himself into ranch repairs with single-minded intensity. He fixed the rotting porch boards, replaced broken fence posts along the north pasture, cleaned out the barn until it gleamed. He inventoried equipment, organized the tack room, and went through his father's financial records with meticulous care. The ranch was in better shape than he'd initially thought. His father had kept up with the essential maintenance even as his health failed, and the herd was healthy if smaller than it had been in Benjamin's prime. With work and investment, Wyatt could build it back up. The question was whether he wanted to. On the fourth day after their dinner, he rode into town with a purpose. Miles Granger's office was on Main Street, above the hardware store, accessed by a narrow staircase that creaked under his boots. The lawyer looked up from his desk as Wyatt entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Wyatt, I wasn't expecting you." "I need to see my father's financial records, all of them, including the loan agreement with Lily Warren." Wyatt settled into the chair across from Miles's desk, his hat balanced on his knee. Miles studied him for a moment, then pulled out a thick folder. "Everything's here. The loan terms are generous. No interest, 10-year repayment schedule, payments of $200 a month. Your father structured it so that if she maintains the payment schedule, she'll own the property free and clear by the time she's 35. Wyatt scanned the documents, noting his father's signature, Lily's careful script countersigning. "And she's never missed a payment?" "Not once. In fact, she's occasionally paid extra when she's had a good season." Miles leaned back in his chair. "She's a smart rancher, Wyatt. Better than most men I've worked with. She just needs a fair shake from the bank." "Which Peterson won't give her." "Harold's old school. Thinks women should stick to cooking and child-rearing." Miles's distaste was evident. "Between you and me, the bank board is starting to question some of his lending decisions. He's turned down several solid applications from women and minorities while approving loans for men with worse credit and worse prospects." An idea was forming in Wyatt's mind, audacious and probably stupid, but he couldn't shake it. What if there was a way to guarantee her loan, not as a co-signer, but as collateral? "What kind of collateral?" "My ranch, or a portion of it." Wyatt leaned forward, warming to the idea. "The water rights she wants on Willow Creek, they're adjacent to my property. What if I offered an easement agreement guaranteeing her access to water from my land if the creek deal falls through? It would reduce the bank's risk without me signing the loan directly." Miles was quiet, considering. "It's unusual, but it could work. You'd be guaranteeing her water supply, which is the bank's main concern about her operations' viability. And an easement agreement between neighboring ranches isn't unheard of." "Drop the paperwork." "Wyatt, are you sure about this? It ties your property to hers in a significant way." "I'm sure." More sure than he'd been about anything in a long time. Miles pulled out a legal pad, making notes. "I'll need a few days to draft the agreement properly, and you'll need to present it to the bank board, not just Peterson." "Fine. Set up the meeting." By the time Wyatt left Miles's office, it was nearly noon. He walked down Main Street, noting the changes 6 years had brought. The old diner had a new name, the hardware store had expanded, and there was a coffee shop where the feed store used to be. But the bones of the town remained the same, the church with its white steeple, the school building on the hill, the post office that doubled as the town's gossip central. He stopped at the diner for lunch, settling into a booth by the window. The waitress was new, a young woman he didn't recognize, and she took his order without the curious questions he'd been fielding from longtime residents. He was halfway through a mediocre burger when the door opened and Lily walked in. She didn't see him at first, focused on exchanging pleasantries with old Mrs. Chen behind the counter, but then she turned, scanning the room for an empty seat, and her eyes locked on his. For a moment he thought she might leave, but then she squared her shoulders and walked over. "Mind if I sit?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "Please." He gestured to the opposite bench, his heart rate picking up. She slid in, and the waitress appeared to take her order. They made small talk about the weather, the state of the roads, nothing of substance, until the food arrived, and they were alone again. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lily began, her eyes on her plate. "About staying, about us, about all of it." Wyatt waited, afraid to speak, and break whatever spell was allowing her to continue. "I want to believe you. God, I want to believe you so badly, it scares me." She looked up, and her eyes were clearer than they'd been at dinner, more resolved. "But I meant what I said about needing time. I can't just jump back into something with you because of old feelings and good intentions." "I understand." Do you? Because I don't think you realize what you're asking. You're asking me to risk everything again. My heart, my peace of mind, the life I've carefully rebuilt over 3 years. That's not a small thing. You're right. It's not small. It's everything. He set down his fork, giving her his full attention. Which is why I'm willing to go as slow as you need. I'm not asking you to decide anything today, or next week, or next month. I'm just asking you to let me prove that I mean what I say. And how exactly do you plan to do that? However you'll let me. Be your neighbor, your friend, someone you can count on when things get hard. He paused, then added carefully, I've been talking to Miles about the water rights situation. Her expression immediately shuddered. Wyatt, I told you, I'm not co-signing anything, but I am offering an easement agreement that would guarantee you water access from my land if the creek deal doesn't work out. It gives the bank security without me taking over your loan or your independence. She stared at him, emotions warring across her face. Anger, hope, suspicion, gratitude. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do. Because my father would have done it if he'd thought of it before he died. Because you deserve a fair shot at building your ranch without the bank holding you hostage. He held her gaze. And yes, because I love you. But the offer stands even if you never want to see me again socially. This is neighbor helping neighbor. Nothing more complicated than that. Everything with you is complicated, she said, but there was less heat in it than before. Maybe, but this doesn't have to be. Say yes to the easement agreement. Let me do this one thing, and if it makes you uncomfortable having me around, I'll keep my distance. You'll have your water rights, and I'll have helped settle a debt my father left unpaid. She was quiet for a long moment, working through the implications. And you don't expect anything in return? Nothing you're not willing to give freely. The waitress came by with coffee refills, breaking the tension. Lily wrapped her hands around the warm mug, staring into the dark liquid like it held answers. Finally, she looked up. Okay, I'll accept the easement agreement on one condition. Name it. You let me pay for it. Not in cash, I know that defeats the purpose. But in trade, labor, livestock, whatever makes it a fair exchange. I won't take charity, not even from you. A slow smile spread across Wyatt's face. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Warren. It's the only way I know how to be. But she was smiling too, just a little, and it felt like the sun breaking through clouds. They finished their lunch talking about ranch business, safe, neutral territory that let them be comfortable with each other again. Lily told him about her plans to expand her horse breeding program, and he told her about new ranching techniques he'd learned in Colorado. It felt almost normal, almost like the easy friendship they'd had before everything got complicated. When they stood to leave, Lily hesitated, then said, There's a ranchers' meeting next week. Community planning for the winter grazing schedules. You should come. I'll be there. And Wyatt? She touched his arm briefly, the contact electric even through his jacket. Thank you. For the easement, for understanding about the time I need. It means more than you know. Any time. He watched her walk out, noticing how several of the diner's patrons had been studiously pretending not to watch them. By tomorrow, the whole town would know they'd had lunch together, and by next week there would be rumors about wedding bells. Small towns never changed, but this time, maybe the rumors wouldn't be entirely unwelcome. The ranchers' meeting was held in the community hall, a drafty building that served as everything from polling place to square dance venue depending on the season. Wyatt arrived early, claiming a seat in the middle of the folding chairs set up in rows. The hall slowly filled with his father's old friends and rivals, weathered men in wranglers and work shirts, a handful of women who ran their own spreads, and the younger generation trying to keep family ranches alive in an era of corporate agriculture. Lily came in with a group from the Southern Valley, and Wyatt felt half the room's eyes swing between them as she deliberately chose a seat 2 rows ahead of him. She wore a dark green shirt that brought out the color in her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a practical bun. All business, no nonsense, and completely beautiful. The meeting started with the usual bureaucratic nonsense, minutes from the last gathering, financial reports, committee updates. Then they got to the meat of it, winter grazing rotation. The valley's ranchers had been coordinating their schedules for decades, making sure no one overgrazed the public lands they all depended on. Harold Peterson, who apparently served on every board in town, droned on about sustainable practices and environmental responsibility while clearly having no understanding of actual ranch work. Wyatt saw more than one rancher roll their eyes, but Peterson had political connections and a loud voice, so everyone tolerated him. Then they got to individual ranch updates, and Lily stood to present her plans. She outlined her expanded herd, her rotation schedule, her request for additional grazing allotment based on her growing operation. She was clear, confident, and thoroughly professional, exactly what any rancher would present. Peterson interrupted her. Mrs. Warren, the committee has concerns about allocating additional resources to your operation given the uncertainty about your water access situation. My water access is secure, Lily replied, her voice level. I'm in the process of purchasing the rights to Willow Creek, and I have backup arrangements in place. Purchasing with money you don't have yet. The bank hasn't approved that loan. Peterson smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Perhaps it would be more responsible to maintain your current allotment until your financial situation stabilizes. Wyatt felt his temper rise. He stood before he'd consciously decided to speak. The Calder Ranch is providing Mrs. Warren with an easement agreement guaranteeing water access regardless of the creek purchase. Her operation is as stable as any here. The room went silent. Every head turned to stare at him, then at Lily, then back again. Peterson's face reddened. Mr. Calder, I don't believe you're on the speaking list. I am now, and I'm vouching for the Warren Ranch's viability. She's got solid management, growing livestock, and now guaranteed water. There's no reason to deny her request unless you're operating on prejudice instead of policy. Now see here. No, you see here. Wyatt walked down the aisle to stand beside Lily, who was looking at him with wide eyes that might have been gratitude or horror. He couldn't tell. My father worked with Mrs. Warren for 3 years and never had a single complaint. She pays her debts, manages her land responsibly, and contributes to this community. If the committee denies her request, it better be based on sound ranch management principles, not on the fact that she's a woman running an operation alone. One of the older ranchers, Tom Morrison, stood up. The boy's right. Lily Henderson, Warren, has done nothing but work herself half to death keeping that place running. I say we approve her request. Another voice joined in, then another. Peterson tried to maintain control of the meeting, but momentum had shifted. Within 15 minutes, Lily's expanded grazing allotment was approved by voice vote, and Peterson was left sputtering about proper procedures. After the meeting ended, several ranchers came up to clap Wyatt on the shoulder and welcome him back. A few asked pointed questions about his relationship with Lily, which he deflected with practice ease. Through it all, she stood to the side, talking with Tom Morrison about cattle prices, but Wyatt caught her glancing at him more than once. Finally, the crowd thinned, and they were left nearly alone in the emptying hall. Lily walked over, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. That was quite a speech. You were being treated unfairly. Someone needed to say something. I could have handled Peterson myself, but there was no real anger in her voice. I know you could have. But you shouldn't have to handle prejudiced nonsense alone when you have neighbors who can back you up. He shoved his hands in his pockets, suddenly unsure. I hope I didn't overstep. You did. But she paused, and a smile tugged at her lips. But I'm glad you did. Thank you, Wyatt, for standing with me. It's been a long time since anyone has. Get used to it. I meant what I said about being someone you can count on. They walked out together into the cold November night. The first snow of the season was starting to fall, light flakes that wouldn't amount to much but promised harder weather to come. Their horses were tied side by side at the hitching post, and they stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to leave. Will you come to dinner again? Wyatt asked, taking a chance. Same deal as before, just 2 friends, no pressure. Lily looked up at the falling snow, considering. Then she looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the walls coming down, brick by careful brick. Same deal as before, huh? Where you cook something that makes me realize I've been eating poorly for 3 years? Something like that. Okay, but this time I'll bring dessert. I might not be much of a cook, but I make a decent apple pie. It's a deal. She mounted her horse, settling into the saddle with that easy grace he'd come to love watching. Good night, Wyatt called her. Good night, Lily Warren. He watched her ride into the snowy darkness, And this time when she disappeared, he didn't feel the same crushing weight of loss. This time felt like a beginning instead of an ending, like maybe, just maybe, some stories got second chances. The snow fell harder, covering the valley in white, and Wyatt rode home to a house that didn't feel quite so empty anymore. There was work to be done, fences to mend both literal and metaphorical, and a future to build from the ruins of the past. But for the first time since he'd gotten the telegram about his father's death, Wyatt felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Home. Not running, not hiding, not trying to forget. Just home. With the woman he'd never stopped loving slowly, carefully, starting to trust him again. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. The snow that had started the night of the ranchers' meeting didn't let up for 3 days. By the time it finally stopped, the valley lay buried under 8 inches of white, and the temperature had dropped low enough that Wyatt's breath froze in clouds every time he stepped outside. Winter had arrived early and hard, the way it sometimes did in Montana, and every rancher in the valley scrambled to ensure their livestock had adequate shelter and feed. Wyatt spent those 3 days working from dawn until well past dark, moving cattle to lower pastures, checking water sources to make sure they hadn't frozen solid, and reinforcing the barn against winds that howled down from the mountains like wolves. It was exhausting, brutal work, but it felt good to use his body this way, to fall into bed each night too tired to think, too worn out for the complicated emotions that came with being back home. On the 4th day, the sun finally broke through the clouds, turning the snow-covered valley into something magical. Everything sparkled in the bright light, pristine and untouched except for the tracks of deer and elk that had ventured down from the higher elevations. Wyatt was in the barn, mucking out stalls, when he heard a horse approaching at speed. He emerged into the brilliant sunlight, squinting, and saw Lily riding hard up the drive. Something was wrong. He could tell by the way she sat the saddle, the urgency in her movements. His heart kicked into overdrive as she pulled up, her horse blowing hard, steam rising from its flanks. "Wyatt, I need help." Her face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. "It's one of my mares. She's foaling early and something's wrong. The vet's stuck on the other side of the valley. Roads are still impassable. I can't do this alone." He was already moving toward his own horse before she finished speaking. "Give me 2 minutes." He grabbed his coat and gloves, called out to his ranch hand Jimmy to finish the morning chores, and was mounted within 90 seconds. They rode out together, pushing through the snow as fast as they dared, the cold air burning in their lungs. Lily didn't speak, all her focus on getting home, and Wyatt matched her pace, his mind running through what little he knew about difficult births. The Henderson place, he still thought of it that way despite the name change, looked smaller than he remembered but well maintained. The barn was newer than his, with a metal roof that shed snow efficiently. They dismounted at a run, and Lily led him inside to a large foaling stall where a bay mare lay on her side, clearly in distress. "How long has she been down?" Wyatt knelt beside the animal, running experienced hands over her swollen belly. "About 2 hours. She's been trying to push, but nothing's happening." Lily's voice shook slightly. "This is Shadow's first foal. She's only 4 years old, might be too young. I don't know." "Hey." Wyatt looked up at her, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. "We're going to help her. You've done this before, right?" "Twice, but both times were normal births. Nothing like this." She knelt on the mare's other side, stroking the animal's neck, murmuring reassurances. Wyatt rolled up his sleeves and began a careful examination. What he found made his stomach clench. The foal was breech, coming backward instead of front hooves and nose first. It wasn't impossible to deliver, but it was dangerous for both mare and foal, and time was critical. "It's breech," he said quietly. "I'm going to try to turn it, but I need you to keep her calm. Talk to her. Keep her still as much as possible." Lily's face went white, but she nodded, positioning herself at the mare's head, continuing her low, soothing words. Wyatt said a quick prayer to anyone who might be listening and began the delicate, difficult work of reaching inside to manipulate the foal into a better position. The mare thrashed, crying out, and Lily held her head, tears streaming down her face as she whispered encouragement. Wyatt worked as carefully as he could, sweat dripping despite the cold. His entire focus narrowed to the feel of the tiny hooves he was trying to reposition. Minutes stretched like hours. His arms ached, his back screamed in protest, But slowly, incrementally, he felt the foal begin to turn. "Come on, little one," he muttered. "Work with me here. Just a little more." And then suddenly the foal was in position, front hooves first, and the mare gave a tremendous push. Wyatt guided the foal as it emerged, slick and dark and impossibly small. Another push, and the head came free. One more, and the entire foal slid out onto the straw bedding, still wrapped in its membrane. Wyatt quickly cleared the membrane from the foal's nose and mouth, and after a heart-stopping moment, it took its first gasping breath. The mare lifted her head, nickering, and somehow found the strength to turn and begin licking her baby clean. Lily let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Will they be okay?" "I think so." Wyatt sat back on his heels, shaking with adrenaline and relief. "The foal's breathing well, and the mare's responding. We'll need to watch them closely for the next few hours, but I think they're going to make it." She launched herself at him without warning, throwing her arms around his neck, and he caught her automatically, both of them kneeling in the straw and afterbirth, and not caring even a little bit. She was crying in earnest now, her face pressed against his shoulder, and he held her tight, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring the same kind of reassurances she'd been giving the mare. "I was so scared," she whispered against his neck. "I thought I was going to lose them both, and I didn't know what to do." "But you didn't lose them. They're fine, Lily. You're fine. Everything's fine." He pulled back enough to look at her face, using his thumbs to wipe away her tears. "You did exactly the right thing, coming to get help." "I came to you." Her eyes locked on his, gray-green and swimming with emotion. "When I needed someone, I came to you." The weight of that admission hung between them. Wyatt cupped her face in his hands, heedless of the mess on them, and said, "And I'll always be there when you need me. Always, Lily. I meant what I said." She kissed him, just leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, tentative and sweet and tasting of salt from her tears. For a second, Wyatt froze in shock, and then he was kissing her back, 6 years of longing and regret and love pouring into the contact. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he obliged, wrapping his arms around her waist and losing himself in the sensation of finally having her back. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the foal was struggling to stand on wobbly legs, and the mare was watching them with liquid brown eyes that seemed almost knowing. "I'm sorry," Lily said, though she didn't move away from him. I shouldn't have." "Don't." Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "Don't apologize for the best thing that's happened to me in 6 years. I said I needed time, and I'll give you all the time you need. But right now, in this moment, can we just be here? Be us?" She nodded, and they stayed like that, holding each other in the straw, while new life stumbled and found its footing beside them. Eventually they pulled apart, both self-conscious now, and turned their attention back to mare and foal. The little one, a filly with a white star on her forehead, was nursing, and the mare seemed content despite her ordeal. "She's beautiful," Lily said softly, watching the pair with undisguised love. "What will you name her?" "Hope." Lily glanced at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "Because she came when I'd almost given up on things working out." The words carried layers of meaning neither of them was quite ready to speak out loud. Wyatt reached for her hand, and she let him take it, their fingers lacing together naturally. They stood like that for a long time, watching the foal nurse, neither wanting to break the spell of this moment. Finally, practical concerns intruded. The mare needed fresh water and feed, the stall needed cleaning, and they both needed to wash off the evidence of the difficult birth. They worked together with easy efficiency, falling into a rhythm that felt familiar despite the years apart. Lily brought clean straw while Wyatt mucked out the soiled bedding. He carried water while she mixed a special mash to help the mare recover her strength. When the work was done and they'd ensured both animals were stable, they walked to the house, a small, neat structure with blue shutters and a front porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Wyatt had never been inside during their brief courtship, and he felt oddly nervous crossing the threshold now. The interior was simple but comfortable, with feminine touches that spoke of Lily's personality. Quilts draped over furniture, books stacked on side tables, photographs on the walls showing people he didn't recognize. Her life for the past 6 years, the parts he hadn't been there for. I should make coffee, Lily said, moving toward the kitchen with that purposeful energy he recognized as her way of dealing with overwhelming emotion. And we should eat something. When was the last time you ate? Breakfast, I think. What time is it now? She glanced at the clock on the wall. Nearly 3 in the afternoon. No wonder I'm starving. They made sandwiches together, moving around the small kitchen in a dance of proximity and careful not touching now that the crisis had passed. The kiss in the barn hung between them, acknowledged but not discussed, present in every glance and accidental brush of hands. Finally, sitting at her small kitchen table with sandwiches and coffee, Wyatt couldn't stand it anymore. We should talk about what happened. Should we? Lily stared into her cup. I kissed you back, Lily. I'm not sorry I did, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. She looked up at him, her expression vulnerable. I'm not sorry either. That's what scares me. I should be more careful, more cautious, but when you were there helping Shadow, when you knew exactly what to do and you saved them both, She stopped, searching for words. I remembered why I loved you in the first place. Why did you love me, I mean? It wasn't a question he'd meant to ask, but now that it was out there, he needed to know. She considered for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Because you were kind. Everyone thinks ranchers need to be hard, especially men like your father, but you weren't. You were gentle with animals, patient with people who were slower than you, and you always saw the best in situations. You made me laugh when I wanted to cry, and you never made me feel small or less than because I was a woman who wanted to run a ranch instead of just marrying into one. And now? His heart hammered against his ribs. Now you're all of that still, but more. Steadier, maybe. More certain of who you are. She met his eyes. You came when I needed help without hesitation. You stood up for me at that meeting. You're offering help without asking for anything in return. That's not the boy who left. That's a man who knows what matters. You matter. You've always mattered, even when I was too stupid and scared to fight for you. Wyatt reached across the table, and this time when he took her hand, it felt like a promise. I know I hurt you. I know trust isn't something I can just ask for back. But I'm asking anyway, Lily. Give me a chance to prove I'm not that scared kid anymore. I want to. Her voice dropped to a whisper. God, I want to so much. But I'm scared too, Wyatt. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of what people will say. Scared of... She stopped, biting her lip. Scared of what? Scared that this is just proximity and nostalgia. That we're trying to recapture something that was never going to work in the first place. The words rushed out like she'd been holding them back for too long. What if we're just two lonely people who have history, and 6 months from now we realize we don't actually fit anymore? Wyatt thought about that, really thought about it, instead of just reacting. That's a fair fear, and I can't promise that won't happen, but I can promise to be honest with you, to not run when things get hard, and to fight for us even when it would be easier to walk away. The rest, whether we fit, whether this works, that's something we'll only know by trying. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll know. We won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been. He squeezed her hand gently. But I think it will work. I think we're both different enough to avoid old mistakes and similar enough that the core of what we had is still there. She studied his face for a long moment, and he let her, holding still under her scrutiny. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Okay, we try, but slow, Wyatt. We take this slow and careful. As slow as you need, and honest. If either of us starts feeling like this isn't right, we say so. No more running, no more just disappearing. Agreed. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Thank you for giving me this chance. She smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the worry and fear and leaving something softer. Thank you for saving my mare. They finished their lunch talking about safer things, ranch business, winter preparations, the community holiday party that was coming up in December. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences, and when Wyatt finally said he should head back to check on his own stock, Lily walked him to the door. On the porch, with the setting sun painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and pink, Wyatt turned back to her. That dinner invitation still stands. You, me, and your famous apple pie. Friday night? Perfect. She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and sweet. Be safe riding home. Always am. But he lingered for a moment, memorizing the sight of her framed in the doorway of her house, looking like she belonged exactly there. Then he mounted his horse and rode out, glancing back once to see her still standing there, watching him go. This time, though, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like the beginning of something worth waiting for. The week that followed fell into a pattern that felt both new and achingly familiar. Wyatt threw himself into ranch work during the day, but every evening he found himself riding to the ridge that overlooked Lily's property, checking to make sure he could see smoke rising from her chimney, lights in her windows, signs that she was safe and warm. He told himself he was just being a good neighbor, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. He was drawn to her the way a compass needle found north. Lily, for her part, stopped by the Calder Ranch twice that week under the guise of ranch business. Once to discuss the easement agreement that Miles had finally finished drafting, and once to bring him a loaf of bread she'd baked and claimed had turned out too large for one person. Both times they ended up talking for hours, seated at his kitchen table or standing by the barn, finding excuses to extend the visits just a little longer. The bank board met on Thursday, and Wyatt attended to present the easement agreement formally. Harold Peterson tried to find fault with the arrangement, questioning the property boundaries and the legal language, but Miles had done his work well. The agreement was airtight, and with Tom Morrison and several other influential ranchers backing the proposal, the board had no choice but to approve Lily's loan for the water rights. Wyatt drove straight from the bank to Lily's ranch, finding her in the barn checking on Shadow and Hope. The foal had gained strength with each passing day, and now she frolicked around the stall with the wobbly enthusiasm of the very young. They approved it, Wyatt said without preamble. Lily turned, her face lighting up with hope. The loan? Every penny. You can purchase the water rights as soon as the paperwork goes through. He leaned against the stall door, grinning. You're going to own that creek, Mrs. Warren. She let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses, then launched herself at him for the second time in a week. This time he was ready, catching her and spinning her around while she laughed against his shoulder. When he set her down, she was flushed and breathless, and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. Thank you, she said, her hands still resting on his shoulders. For the easement, for standing with me at the board meeting, for everything. You would have gotten it on your own merits eventually. Maybe, but this is faster, and this winter is going to be hard. Having that water secured means everything. She pulled back slightly, her expression turning serious. I meant what I said about paying you back for the easement. I won't take something for nothing. And I told you we'd work something out. But right now, I'm more interested in collecting on another debt. At her questioning look, he added, You owe me an apple pie and a dinner, remember? Her laugh was like music. That's tomorrow night. I haven't forgotten. Good, because I've been thinking about that pie for days. Just the pie? Her eyes held a challenge, playful and warm. Well, the company's not bad either. She swatted his arm, but she was smiling, and when she went back to checking on the horses, Wyatt stayed, helping with evening chores and not wanting to leave. They worked together as the sun set, falling into an easy partnership that felt right in a way nothing had in years. Friday evening arrived with clear skies and temperatures that had moderated enough to make the ride between ranches pleasant instead of punishing. Wyatt prepared dinner with even more care than the first time, determined to show Lily that his cooking skills weren't a fluke. He made roasted chicken with herbs from his mother's old garden that he'd somehow kept alive through the autumn, root vegetables from the cellar, and fresh rolls that he'd practiced making twice during the week to get right. Lily arrived right on time, riding up just as the sun touched the western mountains. She carried a pie tin wrapped in a kitchen towel, and she'd worn a dress, nothing fancy, just a simple dark blue cotton that brought out her eyes and reminded him achingly of that last day 6 years ago. You wore blue, he said as he helped her down from her horse. She blushed slightly. I remembered you always liked this color on me. That admission, small as it was, made his heart soar. He offered his arm, and she took it, letting him escort her inside like they were heading to a church social instead of a simple dinner between neighbors. The meal was everything Wyatt had hoped for. The food turned out well, the conversation flowed easily, and Lily relaxed in a way he hadn't seen since he'd been back. She told him stories about the past 3 years, the struggles and small victories of running a ranch alone, the way the community had slowly come to respect her competence, the loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed her on winter nights. "I used to pretend you were just in the next room," she admitted over her second glass of wine, her cheeks flushed from alcohol and firelight. "Those first few months after you left, I'd come in from chores and imagine you were there, reading the paper or fixing something that had broken. It was pathetic, but it got me through." "It's not pathetic. I did the same thing, except I'd imagine what you were doing at that exact moment. 7 in the morning, she's feeding the horses. Noon, she's checking fence lines. Evening, she's watching the sunset from the porch." He reached across the table and she met him halfway, their hands clasping. "I tried to forget you, Lily, tried to convince myself I'd made the right choice, that duty mattered more than love. But I couldn't. Every woman I met, I compared to you. Every sunset made me wonder if you were watching the same sky. Why didn't you come back sooner?" Pride, shame, fear that you'd moved on and wouldn't want to see me. He paused, then added with painful honesty, "And fear that you would want to see me. And I'd have to admit I'd wasted 6 years we could have had together." "They weren't wasted," she said softly. "We both needed to grow up, to become who we are now. The people we were at 22 and 24, I don't know if they could have made it work. Too young, too malleable by what other people wanted. And now? Now I know who I am. I know what I want, and I'm old enough to fight for it instead of just accepting what life hands me." Her eyes held his, steady and sure. "I want this, Wyatt. I want us to try." He came around the table then, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. This kiss was different from the one in the barn, less desperate, more intentional. A promise instead of an accident. She melted against him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, and he held her like she was precious and necessary and his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "Stay. Please stay." "I can't." But she didn't move away, her body still pressed against his. "Not yet. When that happens, if that happens, I need it to be right. Not rushed, not caught up in the moment." "I understand." And he did, even as his body protested. "But can you stay for pie and coffee? And maybe some of those talks that last until midnight?" She smiled, reaching up to cup his face. "I can stay for all of that." They settled on the couch in front of the fire, the pie forgotten for the moment, and talked the way they used to when they were young, and the future seemed like something they could shape with their bare hands. Lily told him about her dreams for the ranch, not just survival, but true success, a breeding operation that would be known throughout Montana. Wyatt shared his own plans for rebuilding his father's legacy, healing the wounds that Benjamin's stubbornness had created in the community. "He tried to make amends," Lily said, her head resting on Wyatt's shoulder, his arm around her waist. "Your father, I mean. Those last few months, he'd ride over and just talk, not about anything important, just weather and cattle and the small things that make up a life. I think he was lonely. He pushed everyone away. That was his gift, making sure no one could hurt him by keeping them at arm's length." Wyatt stared into the fire, thinking about the letters, the unsent apologies. "I'm not going to make his mistakes. I'm not going to let pride or fear keep me from the people I love." "Good." She tilted her face up to his. "Because I'm not letting you run away again. If this gets hard, and it will get hard, we talk it through. We fight if we need to, but we don't run." "Deal." He kissed her again, softer this time, sealing the promise. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the clock struck midnight. Lily finally stirred, reluctance in every movement. "I should get home. Morning chores come early. I'll ride with you part way. You don't need to." "I want to." So they rode out together under a sky so clear the stars looked close enough to touch, their horses walking side by side, their breath steaming in the cold air. At the ridge where their properties met, they stopped, looking down at the valley spread below them. "My mother used to ride here," Wyatt said quietly. "Dad told me in one of those letters. She'd come here as a girl, before her family lost the land, and she'd watched the eagles nest in those pines. He pointed to a stand of tall trees on what was now Lily's property. "I've seen them," Lily said. "They come back every spring, a mated pair. They've been using the same nest for years. Eagles mate for life, don't they?" She looked at him, understanding the question beneath the question. "They do. Loyal until death." "That's what I want," Wyatt said, holding her gaze. "Not just to try, not just to see if this works. I want forever, Lily. I want you to be my mate for life, the way those eagles are for each other." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she was smiling. "That's a big thing to say after 2 weeks of dinners and hard work. I've known you for 8 years and loved you for 7. The 2 weeks are just me finally getting brave enough to fight for what I should have fought for the first time around." He reached for her hand, their horses standing close enough to allow the contact. "I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I know we need time, need to prove to ourselves and each other that this is real and lasting. But I'm telling you my intentions so you know where I'm headed." "Forever," she whispered. "That's terrifying." "It is, but it's less terrifying than the alternative, spending the rest of my life without you." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Think about it. No pressure, no rush. But know that's where I'm headed." She nodded, and they sat there on their horses in the starlight, hands joined, two people who'd lost each other and found their way back against all odds. Finally, Lily pulled gently away, gathering her reins. "Good night," Wyatt called her. "Thank you for dinner, and for the honesty, and for everything." "Good night, Lily Warren. Stay safe." He watched her ride down the slope toward her house, and this time he didn't leave until he saw her reach her door, saw the lamp light up in her window, knew she was home and safe. Then he turned his own horse toward home, his heart fuller than it had been in 6 years, and rode through the starlit night thinking about eagles and forever and the woman who'd stolen his heart and never given it back. November slipped into December with the kind of bitter cold that turned the valley into a study in whites and grays. The snow deepened until it reached the fence posts, and the ranchers settled into the rhythm of winter work, breaking ice on water troughs, hauling feed to livestock, and praying that the spring thaw wouldn't come with devastating floods. Through it all, Wyatt and Lily built something fragile and precious between them, meeting for dinners twice a week, working together on ranch projects, and slowly learning how to trust again. The town noticed, of course. In a place like Riverbend Ridge, 2 people couldn't breathe in each other's direction without someone commenting on it. The gossip ranged from approving, "About time those 2 worked things out," to scandalous, "Barely decent, her husband not even 3 years cold." Lily bore it with the same quiet strength she brought to everything else, holding her head high at the general store and the post office, refusing to be ashamed of finding happiness again. Wyatt found it harder to ignore. He'd been gone long enough that he'd forgotten how suffocating small-town judgment could be, and more than once he had to physically restrain himself from confronting people whose whispered conversations stopped abruptly when he entered a room. It was Lily who talked him down, reminding him that their relationship was nobody's business but their own, and that small minds would always find something to criticize. "Let them talk," she said one evening as they sat in his kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. "They talked when I married Robert too young, and they talked when he died, and they'll talk when we do literally anything that doesn't fit their narrow view of how life should work. I stopped caring what they think about 2 years ago, and I recommend you do the same." "It doesn't bother you, what they say?" "Of course it bothers me. I'm human, not a saint." She took a sip, considering her words. "But bothering me and controlling me are 2 different things. They can whisper all they want. I know the truth about who I am and what I'm doing. That's enough." Her certainty humbled him. Somewhere in the past 3 years, Lily had developed a core of steel that nothing could bend, and Wyatt found himself falling in love with this stronger, surer version of the girl he'd known. She was still kind, still gentle with animals, and patient with people's shortcomings, but she no longer apologized for taking up space in the world. The week before Christmas, the temperature dropped to 15 below zero, and Wyatt woke to find one of his water lines had frozen solid. He spent most of the morning trying to thaw it without success, and by noon he was cold, frustrated, and starting to worry about his livestock going without water for much longer. He was considering desperate measures involving a blowtorch when he heard the sound of an approaching truck. Lily pulled up in her old Ford, and when she climbed out, she had a coil of heating cable over one shoulder and a determined expression on her face. "Heard you were having water troubles. Figured you could use some help." "How did you hear that?" "I haven't told anyone." "Tom Morrison's son drove past this morning and saw you digging around the pump house. Word travels." She hefted the cable. "This should do the trick. We'll wrap it around the pipe, plug it in, and give it a few hours to thaw from the outside in." They worked together in the bitter cold, Wyatt following Lily's instructions as she showed him the technique her late husband had taught her. Her hands were steady despite the temperature, her movements efficient and practiced. Within an hour, they had the cable installed and plugged in, and she pronounced it good enough to leave while they warmed up inside. "You didn't have to come all the way over here," Wyatt said as he made coffee, his fingers still numb despite the gloves he'd worn. "I would have figured something out eventually. I know you would have, but it's faster with two people, and I had the equipment you needed." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping both hands around the mug. "Besides, that's what partners do. They help each other." Partners. He tested the word, liking the weight of it. "Is that what we are?" "I think so. We're building ranches next to each other, helping with each other's work, spending more time together than apart." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Unless you have a different word for it." "I have several words for it, but I promise to go slow." "Slow doesn't mean standing still." She set down her coffee and moved closer, her hands finding his waist. "I've been thinking about what you said at the Ridge, about forever and eagles and intentions." Wyatt's heart hammered against his ribs. And I think I'm ready to stop being quite so careful. I'm not saying we rush into anything, but maybe we stop pretending this is just two neighbors being friendly." Her fingers curled in his shirt. "Maybe we admit we're courting, officially, the way people did when things like that mattered." Courting. A smile spread across his face. "I like that. Old-fashioned and intentional." "Very intentional." She rose on her toes, brushing her lips against his. "So," Wyatt called her, "I'm giving you permission to court me properly, with all the seriousness and commitment that implies." He kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, pouring 6 years of longing and hope into the contact. Her arms came up around his neck, and she pressed closer, and for several long minutes the frozen pipes and the bitter cold and the gossiping town all ceased to exist. There was only this, the two of them, finally on the same page, finally ready to fight for what they both wanted. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you, I take courting very seriously. There will be flowers and proper dates, and me asking permission to hold your hand like we're teenagers." She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet kitchen. "I look forward to all of it." They spent the rest of the afternoon checking on the water line, which eventually thawed, and then moving hay to Wyatt's cattle in the far pasture. Working side by side had become natural over the past month, their movements synchronized in a way that came from growing familiarity and deeper connection. By the time the sun started to set, they were both exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. "Stay for dinner," Wyatt said as they walked back to the house, the snow crunching under their boots. "I picked up steaks in town yesterday, and I make a decent baked potato." "I should probably get home. Or you could stay, and we could sit by the fire and talk about how we're going to handle the town, knowing we're officially courting." He caught her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Plus, it's too cold to ride home on an empty stomach." She pretended to consider, but her smile gave her away. "When you put it that way, I suppose I could be convinced." Dinner was simple but good, and afterward they settled on the couch in front of the fire, just as they had that night weeks ago. But this time there was a new ease between them, a settled quality that came from having declared their intentions. Wyatt pulled her close, and she tucked herself against his side like she belonged there, her head resting on his shoulder. "Tell me about your mother," Lily said quietly. "You never talked about her much, even before." Wyatt was quiet for a moment, gathering memories that had faded with time. "She was gentle, patient in a way my father never was. She'd sing while she worked, old songs her mother taught her. And she loved this valley with everything in her." He gestured toward the window, where darkness had fallen and stars were beginning to emerge. "Dad said she used to ride to your property, the Henderson place, and spend hours just watching the land. I think losing her family's claim to that property broke something in her. I wish I'd known her. She would have loved you, would have been thrilled that I'd found someone who understood ranch life, who wanted to build something instead of just inherit it. He pressed a kiss to Lily's hair. She died too young, 42, and the influenza took her in less than a week. I remember Dad sitting by her bed, holding her hand, and I'd never seen him look so helpless. After she was gone, he just hardened, like he decided loving someone that much wasn't worth the pain of losing them. But you don't believe that? No, I think the love was worth it, even knowing how it ended. He had 20 years with her, 20 years of being happy, and then 30 years of being bitter because he couldn't get past the grief. Wyatt tightened his arm around Lily. I don't want to be like him. I don't want to waste time being afraid of loss instead of grateful for what I have. She tilted her face up to his. Then don't. Be here, with me, and let's make the most of whatever time we get. They kissed again, slow and sweet, and Wyatt felt something settle in his chest, a sense of rightness that had been missing for 6 years. This was where he belonged. Not just in this house or on this ranch, but with this woman, building a future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. The community Christmas party arrived on a Saturday night, held in the same drafty community hall where the ranchers' meeting had taken place. The whole town turned out, bringing covered dishes and homemade desserts, everyone dressed in their Sunday best and determined to celebrate despite the harsh winter. A local band played in one corner, fiddle, guitar, and accordion producing the kind of music that made feet tap and hands clap. Wyatt and Lily arrived separately, but found each other immediately, drawn together like magnets. She wore a dark green dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she'd left her hair down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. Wyatt felt his breath catch at the sight of her, all grace and strength and quiet beauty. You look beautiful, he said, taking her hand and not caring who saw. You clean up pretty well yourself, cowboy. She smiled up at him, and he saw none of the nervousness he'd expected. If anything, she seemed more relaxed than usual, like she'd made peace with whatever judgment the town might pass. They ate together, danced when the music was right, and circulated among the other ranchers with Wyatt's hand possessively on the small of Lily's back. Some people smiled and offered congratulations. Others watched with pursed lips and disapproving eyes. Harold Peterson made a point of ignoring them entirely, turning his back when they approached the refreshment table. He's a small man with a small mind, Tom Morrison said, appearing at Wyatt's elbow with a cup of punch. Don't let him spoil your evening. I won't. Wyatt clinked his cup against Tom's. Thanks for the support at the bank board meeting. It made a difference. You two are good for each other. Anyone with eyes can see it. Tom glanced at Lily, who was talking with a group of ranch wives and looking perfectly comfortable. She's had a hard few years, that girl. Nice to see her smiling again. The evening wore on with music and laughter and the particular warmth that came from community gathering in the coldest part of the year. Wyatt danced with Lily 3 times, holding her closer than was probably proper, and she didn't complain. During the last dance, a slow waltz as the night wound down, she rested her head against his chest and sighed contentedly. Thank you for coming with me tonight, she murmured. Where else would I be? I don't know. But 6 years ago, you would have been somewhere else. Wyoming or Colorado or anywhere but here. She pulled back enough to look at him. I'm glad you're here now. So am I. He spun her gently, and she laughed, the sound pure joy. They left together just after midnight, the cold hitting them like a wall after the warmth of the crowded hall. Their horses stood patiently at the hitching rail, their breath steaming. Wyatt helped Lily mount, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary, and she didn't pull away. Ride home with me, she said suddenly. Lily, not like that, not yet, but stay for coffee at least. I'm not ready for the night to end. How could he say no to that? They rode together through the silent, snow-covered valley, the stars so bright overhead they cast shadows. At Lily's ranch, they settled the horses and went inside, stamping snow from their boots, breath still steaming in the cold. Her house smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, homey and welcoming. She made coffee while Wyatt built up the fire, and they settled on her small couch with their cups, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. I've been thinking, Lily said after a long, comfortable silence, About spring. About what happens when the weather breaks and the real work begins. What about it? I'm going to need help with spring branding, more help than I can afford to hire on. She turned to look at him. And you're going to need help managing your increased herd. It would make sense for us to combine operations for some things. Share equipment, share labor, work together instead of separately. That's very practical. Wyatt set down his coffee cup. But I'm hearing something else beneath the practicality. She smiled, a little nervous now. I'm saying I want to build something with you, not just a relationship, but a real partnership. Our ranches working together, our lives working together. I'm saying I think we should make this official. Official how? His heart was pounding, but he kept his voice steady, needing to hear her say it. I'm saying... She took a breath, steadying herself. I'm saying I love you, Wyatt called her. I never stopped, even when I tried to, even when I married someone else and built a different life. And I don't want to waste any more time pretending I don't want a future with you. The words hung in the air between them, brave and vulnerable, and everything Wyatt had been hoping to hear. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. I love you too, have loved you since I was 24 years old and too stupid to know what I had. I'm not that stupid anymore. Prove it, she whispered. So he kissed her, pouring everything he felt into the contact, love and longing and commitment and promise. She responded with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, turned urgent, and Wyatt felt control starting to slip. He pulled back, breathing hard, resting his forehead against hers. If I don't leave now, I'm not going to be able to leave at all. I know. Her voice was rough, affected. But I'm not asking you to leave, Wyatt. I'm asking you to stay. Lily. Her name was half prayer, half warning. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She stood, taking his hand and pulling him to his feet. I spent 3 years being careful, being practical, doing what I thought I should do instead of what I wanted. I'm done with that. I want you, and I want this, and I want to stop pretending that waiting longer will somehow make it more right. The town will talk. Let them. They'll talk whether we wait or not, whether we're careful or not. At least this way we'll be happy. She led him toward the bedroom, and Wyatt followed, his heart full to bursting with love for this brave, beautiful woman who'd learned to fight for what she wanted. The bedroom was small and simply furnished, but it felt like the most important room Wyatt had ever entered. Lily turned to face him, and in the dim light from the hallway, her eyes were luminous with trust and desire and love. Stay with me, she said, tonight and every night after. I'm done being apart from you. Forever? He needed to hear her say it. Forever. She reached up to kiss him again. I'm choosing you, Wyatt. I'm choosing us. No more fear, no more waiting, just us, building a life together. And so he stayed, and in the quiet hours of that winter night, they found each other again in the most fundamental way. There was tenderness and passion, laughter and tears, and the overwhelming rightness of two people who'd been apart too long finally coming home to each other. When morning came, gray and cold with the promise of more snow, Wyatt woke to find Lily curled against his side, her hair spread across his chest, her breathing deep and even. He lay still, not wanting to wake her, marveling at the simple miracle of this moment. 6 years ago, he'd walked away from this woman, and somehow, impossibly, he'd been given a second chance. She stirred, her eyes opening slowly, and when she saw him watching her, she smiled, sleepy and satisfied and utterly content. Morning. Morning. He brushed hair from her face, his touch gentle. Any regrets? None. You? Only that it took us 6 years to get here. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. But we're here now, and I'm not letting you go again. Good. She stretched, cat-like, then propped herself up on one elbow to look at him properly. So what happens now? Now we get up, have breakfast, and tell the whole damn valley that we're together, properly together, not just courting, but committed. He traced patterns on her bare shoulder, watching goosebumps rise in the wake of his touch. And then, when you're ready, I'm going to ask you to marry me. When I'm ready? She raised an eyebrow. What makes you think I'm not ready now? Are you? Hope flared in his chest. She was quiet for a moment, considering seriously. Ask me in the spring, when the snow melts and the valley turns green and we can see clearly what we're building together. Ask me then, and I'll say yes. Spring it is. He could wait a few more months. After 6 years, a season was nothing. They rose together, helping each other dress, stealing kisses between layers of clothing. Breakfast was simple, eggs and toast and strong coffee, but it felt momentous, this first meal together in her house, the beginning of a new routine. I should get back to my ranch, Wyatt said reluctantly as they cleaned up. Check on the livestock, make sure everything survived the night. And I have chores here, but she caught his hand as he reached for his coat. Tonight, though. Come back tonight and we'll figure out how to make this work. The logistics of 2 ranches and 2 people trying to build one life. I'll be here. He kissed her one more time, long and thorough, a promise of more to come. I love you, Lily Warren. I love you too, Wyatt called her. Now go, before I convince you to stay all day and we both neglect our responsibilities. He rode home through the bitter cold, but Wyatt barely felt it. His body was warm with memories of the night before, his heart full with plans for the future. At his ranch, he threw himself into work with renewed energy, whistling as he fed livestock and broke ice on water troughs. Jimmy, his ranch hand, gave him a knowing look. You're in a good mood this morning, boss. I am at that. Wyatt grinned, not even trying to hide it. Life's finally working out the way it should have from the beginning. That have anything to do with Mrs. Warren? Everything to do with her. Wyatt clapped the younger man on the shoulder. Everything to do with her. The weeks between Christmas and the New Year passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Wyatt and Lily settled into a pattern of shared dinners and shared chores, splitting time between their 2 ranches and slowly learning to function as a unit. Some nights Lily stayed at the Calder Ranch, and some nights Wyatt stayed at hers, and gradually their possessions began to intermingle. Her books on his shelves, his clothes in her closet. The town noticed, of course, and reactions ranged from supportive to scandalized. Harold Peterson made a pointed comment at the general store about the declining moral standards of the community, and Wyatt had to be physically restrained by Tom Morrison from confronting the banker in the middle of the canned goods aisle. Let it go, Tom advised. Peterson's a fool, and everyone knows it. You've got better things to focus on than the opinions of small minds. He was right. Wyatt did have better things to focus on, like the plans he and Lily were making for combining their ranching operations in the spring, or the quiet evenings by the fire talking about everything and nothing, or the way she laughed when he told bad jokes and kissed him to make him stop. On New Year's Eve, they stayed home rather than attending the community dance, choosing instead to celebrate privately with good food and better company. At midnight, Wyatt pulled Lily into his arms on the porch, both of them bundled against the cold, and kissed her as fireworks exploded in the distance, someone in town with more money than sense setting off expensive displays. Happy New Year, he murmured against her lips. Happy New Year. She pulled back to look at him, her face serious despite the celebration. This year, Wyatt. This is our year. I can feel it. Me too. He held her close, looking out at the valley spread below them, the Calder Ranch and the Warren Ranch, soon to be joined not just by property lines, but by love and commitment. Everything's going to change this year, and it's going to be exactly right. January brought the deepest cold of the winter, temperatures that stayed below 0 for days at a time, and snow that fell with relentless persistence. It was the kind of weather that tested ranchers, separating the dedicated from the casual, and Wyatt and Lily met every challenge with combined strength. When her truck wouldn't start in the bitter cold, he drove his over to help with her morning feed. When his barn door froze shut, she brought tools and muscle and got it open. They functioned as a team in ways that felt both entirely new and deeply familiar. One afternoon in late January, Wyatt was in his father's study, his study now, he supposed, though he still thought of it as Benjamin's space, going through more of the old ranch records. He'd been slowly working through decades of accumulated paperwork, trying to organize and digitize the most important documents. In the back of a drawer he'd already searched twice, he found a small wooden box he'd somehow missed before. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a ring. The band was simple gold, but the stone was extraordinary, a deep green emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds, obviously old and obviously valuable. Beneath the ring was a note in his father's handwriting, dated just a month before his death. Wyatt, this was your mother's engagement ring. My mother gave it to me to give to Mary, and Mary wore it for 20 years until she passed. I've kept it safe, waiting for you to find someone worthy of it. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've had the sense to make things right with Lily. She's Henderson blood through her grandmother, which makes her family whether you knew it or not. Give her this ring when the time comes. It belongs with her, and with the future you two should build together. I'm sorry I kept you apart. Don't make my mistakes. Choose love over pride. Dad. Wyatt sat there for a long time, the ring in his palm, reading and rereading his father's final message. Benjamin had known. Even before he died, he'd known Wyatt would come back, would find Lily again, would need this ring. It was his father's blessing from beyond the grave, permission and encouragement all wrapped up in a family heirloom. That evening, Lily arrived for dinner carrying a pot of soup she'd made, claiming Wyatt's cooking was good, but he needed to learn to make things that weren't steak. He let her bustle around his kitchen, watched her move through his space like she belonged there, and felt the ring burning a hole in his pocket where he'd transferred it. Not yet. They'd agreed on spring, and he would honor that. But soon, very soon. They ate together, talking about the day's work and the weather forecast, and Tom Morrison's new bull that he was charging outrageous stud fees for. Normal, everyday conversation that felt precious precisely because it was normal. This was what Wyatt had missed during those 6 years away. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but this quiet domesticity, the simple pleasure of sharing space and time with someone he loved. After dinner, they settled on the couch, and Lily pulled out a notebook she'd been keeping. I've been making plans for the spring for how we're going to coordinate everything between the ranches. Show me. She walked him through her ideas, shared equipment purchases, coordinated grazing schedules, a combined spring branding that would save time and money for both operations. It was practical and intelligent, the kind of planning that came from real ranching experience. There's something else, she said, her voice dropping slightly. A bigger idea, but I wanted to run it by you first. I'm listening. What if we didn't just coordinate between ranches? What if we actually combined them, legally merged the operations into one entity? She looked up at him, nervous but excited. We'd maintain separate property ownership but operate as a single ranch. Shared books, shared profits, shared everything. It would make us more competitive, give us better buying power, and she stopped, biting her lip. And it would be the first step toward a fully combined life, Wyatt finished for her. Yes. She set down the notebook. I know we said spring for bigger commitments, but this is a commitment too, just a different kind. It's me saying I trust you not just with my heart, but with my livelihood, my legacy, everything I've built. Wyatt took her hands in his, holding them gently. Then yes, absolutely yes. We'll merge the operations, and in the spring when the valley turns green, I'll ask you the other question that's been burning in my pocket since I found this today. He pulled out the ring box, watching her eyes go wide. Wyatt, I'm not asking now. We agreed on spring, and I'll keep that promise. But I want you to see it, to know it's waiting. This was my mother's ring, and my father left it for me to give to you when the time was right. He opened the box, and the emerald caught the firelight, glowing with deep green fire. It's yours, Lily, whenever you're ready to wear it. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the ring. It's beautiful. Mary would have worn this. For 20 years. And before that, my grandmother wore it. It's a Calder family ring, but Dad's note said it belongs with Henderson blood, which you have through your grandmother. It's meant for you. She touched the ring lightly, reverently, then closed the box and pushed it back toward him. Keep it safe until spring. When you ask properly, I want the full moment, the question, the ring, all of it. Don't let me spoil it by accepting too soon. He laughed, pulling her into his arms. You're remarkable, you know that? I just know what I want, and I want to do this right. She kissed him, soft and lingering. Now put that ring somewhere safe and come back over here. We have more planning to do, and I can't concentrate when you're looking at me like that. Like what? Like you're counting down the days until you can put that ring on my finger. Can you blame me? But he tucked the ring box safely in his pocket and returned his attention to her notebook, to the practical business of combining two ranches into one thriving operation. They worked together late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. Two people who'd lost each other and found their way back, building something stronger than what they'd almost had the first time around. Outside, the January wind howled and the snow fell, but inside there was warmth and light and love that had survived 6 years of separation and come back fiercer and truer than before. Spring was coming. Wyatt could feel it even in the depths of winter. And with spring would come new life, new beginnings, and the question he'd been waiting 6 years to ask properly. Until then, there was work to do, plans to make, and a partnership to build that would lay the foundation for everything that came after. He looked at Lily, bent over her notebook, her hair falling forward to hide her face, completely absorbed in ranch logistics, and felt his heart swell with love so strong it almost hurt. This was his future, sitting right here in his living room, planning their combined operations with the same fierce determination she brought to everything. And in the spring, when the valley turned green and the eagles returned to their nest on the ridge, he would make sure that future became permanent and binding and forever. February crawled by with the kind of stubborn cold that made even the most optimistic rancher wonder if spring would ever come. But Wyatt watched for the signs. The way the sun sat a little higher in the sky each day, the occasional warm wind that blew down from the mountains carrying the promise of thaw, the restlessness in the livestock that spoke of changing seasons. The ring box stayed in his desk drawer, but he took it out every few days just to look at it, to imagine the moment when he'd finally slip it onto Lily's finger. They formalized the ranch merger in early March, sitting in Miles Granger's office, and signing papers that made them business partners in the eyes of the law. The attorney had smiled knowingly as they worked through the details, clearly aware that business partnership was just the beginning. "You're doing this right," Miles said as he notarized the final document. "Building on solid ground, making sure you work well together before you make it permanent. Your father would approve, Wyatt." "I think he would." Wyatt glanced at Lily, who was reading through the contract one final time with the careful attention she gave everything important. "I think he'd be glad we found our way back to each other." The merged operation meant more coordination, more communication, more time spent together working through the practical details of running what was now one of the largest cattle operations in the valley. They hired on 2 additional ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from town who were eager for steady work and willing to learn. Jimmy took charge of training them, clearly pleased to have moved up in the hierarchy. By late March, the snow had started to melt in earnest, turning the valley into a muddy mess of slush and standing water. The creeks ran high and fast, swollen with runoff, and every rancher in the area held their breath hoping for a gradual thaw instead of the flash floods that could devastate livestock and property. Wyatt and Lily spent long days checking fence lines, moving cattle to higher ground, and reinforcing stream banks where erosion threatened. One afternoon, exhausted and mud-splattered, they stood on the ridge between their properties, the same spot where Wyatt had first spoken of forever, and looked down at the valley spread below them. The eagles had returned, just as Lily had promised, and Wyatt could see them circling their nest in the tall pines, preparing for another season of raising young. "Eagles mate for life," Wyatt said quietly, echoing their conversation from months ago. "They do." Lily leaned against him, her shoulder fitting perfectly under his arm. "Loyal until death, coming back to the same nest year after year, raising their young together. That's what I want with you." He turned to face her fully, his heart suddenly hammering. "I know we said spring, and technically, it's still a few days until the equinox, but Lily, I can't wait any longer." Her eyes widened, understanding dawning. "Wyatt, wait, let me do this properly." He took both her hands in his, holding them gently. 6 years ago, I walked away from you because I was young and scared and too concerned with duty over happiness. It was the worst mistake of my life, and I've regretted it every single day since, but somehow, impossibly, you've given me a second chance. You've let me back into your life, trusted me with your heart, built a partnership with me that's stronger than anything I could have imagined. Tears were already streaming down her face, but she was smiling, and Wyatt took that as encouragement to continue. "You're the strongest person I know. You've survived loss and grief and the judgment of small minds, and you've come through it all with grace and courage and a kind of fierce independence that takes my breath away. You don't need me to complete you or save you or take care of you. You're perfectly capable of all that on your own. But I'm hoping you'll choose to let me stand beside you anyway, as your partner and your husband and your best friend for the rest of our lives. He released one of her hands to pull the ring box from his pocket, opening it to reveal the emerald glowing in the afternoon sunlight. Lily Henderson Warren, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, raise cattle and children with me? Grow old watching these eagles come back year after year? Will you be my mate for life, the way they are for each other? Yes. The word came out choked with emotion, but clear. Yes, Wyatt called her, I'll marry you. I'll choose you every day for the rest of my life, and I'll love you with everything I have. His hand shook as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the emerald catching the light and throwing green fire. Lily stared at it for a moment, tears flowing freely now, then launched herself at him with enough force that he staggered backward, both of them laughing and crying at once. He kissed her there on the ridge with the eagles circling overhead and the valley spread below them, kissed her with all the love and commitment and promise he'd been holding inside for months. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms tight around his neck, the ring cold and solid between them, a symbol of everything they were promising to build together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lily held up her hand to watch the ring catch the light. Your mother wore this for 20 years, and now it's yours for the next 60 if we're lucky. 60 years, she tested the words, smiling. I like the sound of that. Growing old together, watching this valley change, building something that lasts. Speaking of building things, Wyatt pulled her close again, unable to stop touching her now that she was officially his. Have you thought about when you want to get married? I'm partial to sooner rather than later, but I'll wait as long as you need. What about next month? Small ceremony? Just family and close friends? Nothing fancy. She looked up at him, her eyes dancing. Unless you want something bigger? I want whatever you want. Though fair warning, the town is going to talk no matter what we do, so we might as well give them something worth talking about. She laughed, the sound bright and free. Then let's really give them something to discuss. Let's get married in that little church on the hill, the one your parents were married in, and let's invite the whole damn town. No hiding, no apologizing, just us celebrating in front of everyone. You're sure? Harold Peterson will probably have a stroke. Good. Maybe it'll improve his personality. But she sobered slightly, touching his face. I'm sure, Wyatt. I spent 3 years worrying about what people thought, trying to be respectable and proper and everything a young widow should be. I'm done with that. I love you, and I'm proud to be marrying you, and anyone who has a problem with it can keep their opinions to themselves. He kissed her again, marveling at her courage, at the way she'd grown from the uncertain girl he'd known into this fierce, magnificent woman. April, then. We'll talk to Pastor Williams this week. Get it on the books. They rode down from the ridge together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. At Lily's ranch, they celebrated with champagne she'd been saving for a special occasion, toasting their engagement and their future and the life they were building together. I should call Tom Morrison, Lily said, slightly giddy from champagne and happiness. He's been asking about you for weeks, trying to figure out when you were going to propose. He'll want to know he was right about us. Call everyone. Shout it from the rooftops. I want the whole valley to know you said yes. Wyatt pulled her into his lap, both of them sprawled on her couch, the fire crackling and the future stretching bright before them. She did call Tom, and by the next morning the news had spread through Riverbend Ridge like wildfire. Well-wishers stopped by both ranches, some genuinely happy for them, others clearly there to get the gossip firsthand. Wyatt and Lily handled it all with grace and unity, presenting a united front that left no room for speculation or judgment. Pastor Williams was delighted to perform the ceremony and offered them the first Saturday in April, giving them just 3 weeks to prepare. Lily threw herself into planning with the same efficiency she brought to ranch work, keeping everything simple but meaningful. She found a cream-colored dress at a boutique in the next town over, simple and elegant and perfectly suited to a ranch wedding. Wyatt's contribution was to arrange for flowers, wildflowers from the valley, nothing fancy, and to make sure the ranch house was clean top to bottom for the reception they'd host afterward. The invitations went out by word of mouth and hand-delivered notes, and the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Even some of the town gossips seemed won over by the romance of it all. Childhood sweethearts reunited after years apart, building a life together despite the odds. Harold Peterson declined, of course, but Tom Morrison accepted enthusiastically, offering to stand as Wyatt's best man. "I'd be honored," Wyatt told him, shaking the older man's hand. "You've been in my corner since I got back. It means something. Your father and I had our differences, but you're a good man, Wyatt, and that girl you're marrying is special. You two are going to do great things together. I can feel it." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Now, about the bachelor party." "Absolutely not," Wyatt said firmly. "I'm too old for that nonsense, and besides, I've got too much work to do before the wedding to waste time nursing a hangover." But Tom insisted on at least a dinner out, and Wyatt found himself at the local steakhouse 3 nights before the wedding, surrounded by a dozen ranchers who'd become friends over the past months. They told embarrassing stories, gave unwanted advice about marriage, and generally made him laugh until his sides hurt. It was simple and genuine, exactly the kind of celebration Wyatt appreciated. Meanwhile, Lily had her own gathering with the ranch wives and a handful of women from town who'd become her friends during the difficult years. They met at her house, bringing food and wine and the kind of easy female companionship that Wyatt knew she'd been missing. When he stopped by the next morning to check on her, she was glowing. They were wonderful, she told him, still in her bathrobe and clearly not having slept much. They shared their own stories, gave me advice, and made me feel like part of a community instead of an outsider. I didn't realize how much I needed that. "You've never been an outsider," Wyatt said, pulling her close. "You've been one of us all along. It just took some people longer to see it." The wedding day arrived with perfect spring weather, clear skies, temperatures in the 60s, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of new grass and wildflowers. The church on the hill filled with what seemed like half the valley, people packed into pews and standing along the walls. Wyatt stood at the altar with Tom beside him, his heart pounding as the organ began to play. And then Lily appeared at the back of the church, and everything else ceased to matter. She was radiant in her cream dress, her hair swept up, but with soft curls framing her face, carrying a simple bouquet of those valley wildflowers. She walked alone, having no father to give her away, and refusing to have anyone stand in for that role, and her eyes locked on Wyatt's from the moment she appeared. The walk down the aisle seemed to take forever and no time at all, and then she was there beside him, taking his hand, smiling with so much love and joy that he felt his own eyes sting with tears. Pastor Williams performed a simple, beautiful ceremony. They'd written their own vows, and when it came time to speak them, Wyatt's voice shook only slightly. "Lily, I promise to choose you every day, even on the hard days when ranch work is brutal and money is tight and we're both too tired to be reasonable. I promise to be your partner in all things, to respect your strength while supporting you when you need it, to make you laugh when you want to cry. I promise to never run from our problems, to talk through our disagreements, to love you fiercely and faithfully for all the days of my life. You are my home, my heart, and my future, and I'm honored beyond measure that you've chosen to be my wife." Lily's vows were equally moving, her voice clear and strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "Wyatt, I promise to trust you with my heart, my dreams, and my fears. I promise to be your partner in building something lasting, not just a ranch, but a life full of love and laughter and purpose. I promise to believe in us, even when times are hard, to fight for what we have instead of letting it slip away. You came back when you could have stayed gone. You fought for me when you could have given up, and you've shown me that love is worth the risk. I choose you, today and always, as my husband and my best friend." When Pastor Williams pronounced them married and gave Wyatt permission to kiss his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Wyatt pulled Lily into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, propriety be damned, and she kissed him back with equal enthusiasm. They were laughing when they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, the future suddenly real and tangible, and theirs. The reception at the Calder Ranch was everything a wedding celebration should be. Good food, flowing drinks, music and dancing, and the kind of genuine joy that came from community witnessing love triumph over adversity. Wyatt danced with his new wife 3 times in the first hour, unable to let her go for long, and she seemed equally reluctant to leave his side. "Mrs. Calder," he murmured during a slow dance, testing out her new name. "I like the sound of that." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Though legally I'm keeping Warren for the ranch, at least until we figure out the business paperwork. But personally, I'm absolutely Mrs. Calder. Lily Calder, my wife." He spun her gently, and her laugh was pure happiness. "I'm the luckiest man in Montana." "We're both lucky. We got a second chance, and we're not wasting it." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes serious despite the celebration around them. "Thank you for coming back, for fighting for us, for being exactly the man I needed you to be. Thank you for letting me back in, for trusting me again when you had every reason not to." He kissed her softly, sweetly, a promise of the night to come and all the nights after that. They'd decided against a honeymoon, too much work on the ranch with spring calving in full swing, but they did take a long weekend alone at the ranch house, ignoring everything but each other. Those 3 days were a gift, time to be newlyweds without the demands of livestock and business and the outside world intruding. When they returned to work on Tuesday, it was as a fully united team. The ranch hands had taken care of the essential tasks, but there was plenty to catch up on. Wyatt and Lily threw themselves back into the rhythm of ranch life, and somehow it felt different now. More settled, more permanent. This wasn't just a partnership anymore. It was a marriage in every sense of the word. April slipped into May and the valley exploded with new life. Calves were born, the grass turned brilliant green, and the eagles on the ridge successfully hatched their young, 2 fluffy eaglets that Wyatt and Lily checked on regularly during their evening rides. The combined ranch operation thrived, exactly as they'd hoped. Their efficiency improved, their costs decreased, and their reputation grew. By mid-May, they were fielding inquiries from other ranchers interested in buying breeding stock, and Wyatt found himself in the unfamiliar position of being seen as successful rather than just scraping by. It was during one of those evening rides, checking the eaglet's progress, that Lily made an announcement that changed everything again. They stood on the ridge, watching the adult eagles bring food to their young, the setting sun painting everything golden. Lily had been quiet during the ride up, and Wyatt had let her be, sensing she was working through something. "I'm pregnant," she said finally, the words quiet but clear in the evening air. Wyatt turned to her slowly, hardly daring to believe what he'd heard. "You're... really?" "Really. About 6 weeks, best I can figure. I saw Doc Morrison in town yesterday to confirm." She turned to face him, and her expression was a complex mix of joy and nervousness. "I know we didn't plan this so soon, and there's so much work to do, but..." He pulled her into his arms, cutting off her anxious rambling with a kiss that poured out every ounce of love and excitement he felt. When he pulled back, he was grinning so widely his face hurt. "This is incredible. You're incredible. We're going to have a baby." "You're happy?" Relief flooded her features. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I'm elated. Terrified, but elated." He placed a hand gently on her still flat stomach, wonder filling him. "Our child, growing right here. Due in January, right in the middle of the worst winter weather, because of course our baby would choose to arrive at the most inconvenient time possible." But she was laughing, her earlier nervousness evaporating. "We're going to be parents, Wyatt." "We are." He kissed her again, then dropped to his knees, pressing a kiss to her stomach through her shirt. "Hello in there, little one. Your mom and I can't wait to meet you." Lily's laugh turned to tears, the happy kind, and she ran her fingers through his hair as he stayed there, kneeling in the grass, overwhelmed with gratitude and love and the sheer miracle of this moment. They'd come so far, from that first painful separation to this perfect reunion, from 2 separate ranches to one thriving operation, from broken hearts to a love stronger than ever. And now they were creating new life together, building a family that would carry on what they'd started. The summer passed in a haze of work and preparation. They told close friends about the pregnancy, and the news spread through the valley with the usual speed. The ranch wives descended on Lily with advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and stories meant to either reassure or terrify. Wyatt found himself on the receiving end of similar treatment from the ranchers, who offered wisdom about raising children on a working ranch, and warned him about sleepless nights and constant worry. Through it all, they continued to build, not just their ranch and their family, but their partnership. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, figured out how to argue productively and make up quickly, discovered that marriage was harder and better than anything they'd imagined. Some days were difficult, filled with disagreements about ranch management or money or whose turn it was to handle the bookkeeping. But they worked through it all, keeping their promise to talk instead of run, to fight for their relationship instead of letting problems fester. By September, Lily's pregnancy was obvious, her belly swelling with new life. She insisted on continuing ranch work, though Wyatt and the ranch hands conspired to make sure she wasn't doing anything too strenuous. She caught them at it more than once and read them all the riot act about treating her like she was fragile. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told Wyatt firmly after he tried to stop her from climbing a fence. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. I'm fine. I know you are. But humor me? Let me worry about you and the baby. It's my job now." He placed a hand on her belly, feeling the strong kicks from within. "Besides, Junior here is clearly taking after you. Stubborn as hell." She softened, covering his hand with hers. "We can compromise. I'll ease back on the heavy lifting, but I'm not going to sit in a rocking chair for the next 4 months knitting booties. Deal?" "Deal!" October brought the first hard frost, and with it the knowledge that another winter was coming. But this time, Wyatt faced it with excitement rather than dread. This winter would bring their child, the final piece of the life they were building together. They spent evenings preparing the nursery in the main bedroom of the Calder ranch house, painting walls and assembling furniture and arguing amiably about names. "What about Benjamin?" Wyatt suggested one evening as they hung curtains. "After my father, if it's a boy." Lily considered, one hand resting on her belly. "I like it. Benjamin Calder. And if it's a girl? Mary, after my mother. Or," he paused, then added carefully, "what about Rose? After your grandmother, the Henderson who connected our families." Her eyes filled with tears immediately. "You'd want to name our daughter after a Henderson?" "She's part of your family, which makes her part of ours. And according to Dad's letters, she was part of his family too, even if nobody acknowledged it." He moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands joining hers on her belly. "Our child carries both bloodlines, Calder and Henderson. All the old feuds finally put to rest in one person. Seems right to honor both sides." "Rosemary Calder," Lily whispered. "Or Benjamin Robert Calder, honoring both our fathers." "Yes, that's perfect." November arrived with early snow and dropping temperatures. They prepared for winter with the practice of experienced ranchers, moving cattle to sheltered pastures, stocking up on feed, making sure equipment was winterized and ready. The baby was active now, kicking and rolling, and sometimes Wyatt would lie with his head on Lily's lap, talking to their unborn child, telling stories about the ranch and the valley and the family they'd be born into. "Your mom is the strongest person I know," he said one evening, his hand on her belly, feeling the responsive kicks. "She survived things that would have broken most people, and she came through it all with grace and courage. You're lucky to have her as your mother. And you're going to be an amazing father," Lily added, running her fingers through his hair. "Patient and kind and strong. This baby is lucky to have both of us." The winter storms hit in early December, blanketing the valley in snow and dropping temperatures well below zero. Lily moved slower now, her belly large enough to make ordinary tasks difficult, but she remained determined to help where she could. Wyatt hovered, probably more than he should, but she tolerated it with good humor. Christmas came and went in a blur of quiet celebration, just the two of them, exchanging simple gifts and talking about how different next Christmas would be with a baby in the house. They attended the community party, where Lily's pregnancy was the talk of the evening, everyone offering predictions about the baby's sex and advice about everything from colic to college funds. January arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow, and Lily's due date approached with alarming speed. Doc Morrison had warned them that first babies often came late, but Lily insisted she'd be early. "This child is as impatient as both of us combined," she said. She was right. On January 15th, 3 weeks before her due date, Lily woke Wyatt in the middle of the night with a hand on his shoulder and calm certainty in her voice. "It's time. The baby's coming. What followed was a blur of controlled chaos. Wyatt helped her dress, called Doc Morrison, who promised to be there within the hour, and tried very hard not to panic. Lily, in contrast, seemed remarkably calm, breathing through the contractions and offering him reassurance when he was clearly the one who needed it more. "I'm fine," she said for the 10th time, as he helped her to the bedroom they'd prepared. "Women have been doing this forever. It's going to be okay." I know, but you're my woman, and this is our baby, and I'm allowed to be nervous." He gripped her hand as another contraction hit, feeling helpless and awed in equal measure. Doc Morrison arrived as promised, bringing his medical bag and a no-nonsense attitude that immediately made Wyatt feel better. "All right, young lady, let's see where we are." The labor progressed steadily through the night and into the morning. Wyatt stayed by Lily's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, offering water and encouragement and love. She was magnificent, strong and determined, and braver than anyone he'd ever seen. When the pain got bad, she swore like a cowboy, and when it got worse, she gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks, but she never once complained or asked for it to stop. Finally, as the sun broke over the eastern mountains and light streamed through the windows, their baby entered the world with a healthy cry that was the most beautiful sound Wyatt had ever heard. "It's a girl," Doc Morrison announced, placing the squirming, crying infant on Lily's chest. A beautiful, healthy baby girl. Wyatt stared at his daughter, through tears he didn't bother to hide. She was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her displeasure with the world at full volume. Lily was crying too, cradling the baby against her chest, murmuring words of love and welcome. "Rose," Lily whispered, looking up at Wyatt. "Rose, Mary called her." "Rose," Wyatt agreed, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. Instantly, the baby's fingers wrapped around his, gripping tight, and something in his chest cracked open, a well of love so deep and fierce he could barely breathe. "Hello, Rosie girl. Welcome home." The next hours passed in an exhausted, joyful haze. Doc Morrison checked both mother and baby, pronounced them healthy, and left them alone to bond with their new daughter. Wyatt held Rose while Lily slept, marveling at how something so small could feel so monumental. This was his child, created from love and commitment and the second chance he'd almost thrown away. When Lily woke, he placed Rose in her arms and watched as his wife, his strong, beautiful, remarkable wife, nursed their daughter for the first time. The scene was so perfect, so exactly right, that Wyatt felt his throat close with emotion. "We made this," Lily said softly, looking up at him with wonder in her eyes. "We made this perfect little person." "We did." He sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Lily's shoulders, his free hand resting on Rose's back. "Thank you. For her, for us, for giving me another chance when I didn't deserve it. We both deserved a second chance, and look what we did with it." She leaned against him, exhausted but happy. "We built something worth having, didn't we? We built everything." He kissed her temple, then Rose's head, breathing in the scent of new life and new beginnings. A family, a home, a future. Everything I didn't know I was missing until I came back and found you again. The news of Rose's birth spread through the valley quickly, and within days they had a stream of visitors bringing casseroles and baby gifts and congratulations. Tom Morrison was among the first, bringing a hand-carved rocking horse he'd made himself. "Every ranch baby needs a horse to start with," he said gruffly, clearly fighting emotion as he held Rose for the first time. "She's going to be a heartbreaker, this one. Looks just like her mama." The winter storms continued, but inside the Calder ranch house, there was warmth and light, and the particular chaos that comes with a newborn. Wyatt learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, to change diapers with reasonable competence, and to walk endless circles around the house at 3 in the morning when Rose decided sleep was for other babies. Lily recovered quickly, proving as resilient in motherhood as she was in everything else, though she accepted help more gracefully than usual. "I can't do this alone," she admitted one exhausted afternoon when Rose had been crying for hours, and nothing they tried seemed to help. "I need you, Wyatt, not just for the ranch, but for this. For being a parent, for figuring out how to keep this tiny human alive and happy. You're not alone. You'll never be alone again. He took Rose from her, bouncing gently, and miraculously, the baby settled. We're in this together, every step, the good parts and the hard parts and everything in between. February brought a break in the weather, warm enough that Wyatt could take Lily and Rose out for short rides around the property. Rose, bundled in enough layers to resemble a small bear, seemed to love being outside, her dark eyes wide as she took in the snowy landscape. They rode to the ridge one afternoon, the three of them, and looked down at the valley spread below. The eagles were back already, preparing their nest for another season, and seeing them made Wyatt think of that day last spring when he'd proposed, when this future had been just a dream they were hoping to build. "We made it," he said, one arm around Lily, the other supporting Rose against his chest. "Everything we talked about, everything we hoped for, we made it real." "We did, and we're not done yet." Lily gestured at the valley, at their combined ranches working as one. "We're going to build something that lasts, something Rose and her children and their children can be proud of. A legacy of love instead of feuds, partnership instead of stubbornness." "Eagles mate for life," Wyatt said, echoing that conversation from a year ago. "And they come back to the same nest year after year, raising their young together." "Like us." Lily turned to kiss him, careful not to jostle Rose. "My mate for life. My partner. My love above. Forever," Wyatt promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "Through all the seasons, all the years, all the challenges and joys, forever, Lily. You, me, and whatever family we create together." Rose made a small sound, almost like agreement, and they both laughed, the sound carrying across the valley on the spring wind. Below them, the eagles soared, and Wyatt knew they'd continue to soar, returning year after year faithful and strong, just like the love he and Lily had built from the ashes of past mistakes. He'd come home to settle his father's land and found instead the woman who'd held his heart all along. In the process, he'd discovered that some stories did get second chances, that love could survive years of separation and grow back stronger, that the best futures were built on foundations of forgiveness and commitment and choosing each other day after day. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and pink. Rose dozed against his chest, warm and safe. Lily leaned against his side, solid and real and his. And Wyatt Calder, who'd spent 6 years running from his past, stood on that ridge overlooking home and felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought him back. The valley stretched below them, eternal and beautiful, waiting for spring and new life and all the seasons to come. The eagles circled overhead, calling to each other in voices that carried promises of forever. And Wyatt held his family close, knowing with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. Home. Finally, irrevocably, completely home.